see you. It's good to be seeing you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 7:02 according to the clock up here, and so I will call to order the meeting Merrimack Planning Board for August 6, 2019. Let me give the usual welcome to everybody and remind you, if you're going to address the board tonight, to sign in on the clipboard that's on the table in front of me and make sure the microphones are turned on and close enough to you so you can speak clearly into it and the folks at home can hear you. By way of scheduling, our next planning board meeting is currently scheduled for August 20th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in this Matthew Thornton room. Let me appoint Nelson into a voting position for Lynn. That gives us 6 voting members, more than enough for a quorum. I am going to use the chair's privilege and reorder the agenda tonight so that the 2 public hearings on potential new regulations will be handled at the end of the night, and we'll take up the applications and the other business before the board ahead of that, saving everyone the torture of listening to us talk about new regulations for an hour or 2. With that, we are at the Planning and Zoning Administrator's report. Tim, what have you?
Just a brief update that we are down to 2 finalists for the assistant planner position that will be going through their second interviews / plan review exercise this week. Hopeful to have be able to make a decision on one of the 2 by, if not the end of this week, early next week, and then hopefully the HR process doesn't take 2 months to get somebody in there.
Thank you for that update. Any other comments or questions for members of the staff? I do want to take a moment to recognize, and I'll do it again at our next meeting, that our recording secretary, Zina, has decided to retire after many 16 years of doing this fine work for us. And we'll certainly make a big deal of it next time too, but I don't want to miss any opportunity to say thank you for what you do. With that, that concludes the Planning and Zoning Administrator's report, and we will take up item 5 on the agenda next, which is Stephen Chase and Robin Kuzno as the applicants and owners, and review for acceptance and consideration of final approval for a 2-lot subdivision. The parcel is located at 85 Woodward Road in the R1 Residential District and Aquifer Conservation District, Tax Map 7A, Lot 7, and its case number Planning Board 2019-24. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Just to give you a brief overview, this particular project is located up by the Bedford Town Line on Woodward Road. Has been before the zoning board on a number of occasions, initially requesting variances for both frontage and contiguous non-wetland upland soils for lot sizing. Those were ultimately approved. A request for rehearing was requested. The applicant then did some additional field work. The request for rehearing for those initial variances was then denied. They resubmitted for just the contiguous upland area for lot sizing purposes. Those were granted again by the board. There was again a rehearing request from some of the abutters on that. The zoning board at their meeting last week did deny the request for rehearing. So they are still in a 30-day appeal period where those abutters could appeal the project to Superior Court. But the applicant understands that the project may be impacted by that as they move forward with the planning board process. The other thing I will note, based on, I know the initial memo that was written by Robert was for conditional final approval here tonight. I think that based on some of the comments that we received from Public Works, the recommendation for us will be, when we get to that point, to potentially continue to the September meeting so we can deal with those issues from Public Works.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for the introduction. With that, please introduce yourself for the record, and if you've signed in, tell us about the project.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Chisholm, and I'm a project manager and professional engineer with Keach Nordstrom Associates. We're the engineers and surveyors for the project.
Is your mic on?
It is, yes.
Oh, okay.
Bring it a little closer to you. There you
Sure.
go.
Is that, there we go. The plan before you tonight is a 2-lot frontage chop subdivision for the property located at 85 Woodward Road, as Tim just mentioned. The property is located in the northwest corner of Merrimack, adjacent to the Bedford Town Line, within the R1 zoning district and Aquifer Conservation District. As Tim also mentioned, the project did receive 2 variances from the ZBA last month for contiguous upland area. Both of those variances were approved, and basically, if I can come up to the plan. Should I
You
grab the
take that
mic?
microphone with you.
Babusick Brook runs right through the parcel. You know, in total, we're about 7.8 acres. So the contiguous area really that we're focused on is in through here on the new lot, and then here for the existing lot. We've got a little bit more of a lot development plan here that's probably better to look at. Overall, you can see the existing boundary here is in this dashed green line. The proposed boundary is this magenta dash line here, and this is the existing house, pool, and everything that's been there for a while. The applicants and owners of the property are empty nesters. They're looking to downsize, just build a house that fits their current needs. What they're looking for is a little bit more privacy setback off of Woodward Road. They'd like to construct a single-family residence right here. And you know, there's a number of things going on, as I mentioned, with the Babusick Brook. We have also the Shoreland Protection District, which has certain setbacks that each have a unique, I guess, requirement within them. One thing that we did is we met with the state and we ran through all the shoreland calculations, and we met with the Bureau and just had a great discussion with them about the project. They were on board with everything that's going on. Everything that we're doing meets all of their regulations. When the time comes and they actually want to build this house, then they'll have to file for the permit before they can stump any trees or do any of the clearing back here. So to actually get the subdivision approval, they said we didn't need to file anything. The applicants, because of the opposition that's occurred throughout the process here, are really just trying to hold off on filing any permits, just as a matter of waiting for the local approvals to come through first. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Given the brook and obviously the environmental sensitivities that come along with that and the Aquifer Protection District, there's been considerable due diligence that's happened prior to coming here tonight. But we've obviously had to do test pits and verify soils, lot size and calculations and all those things for the state. We've designed a septic system for the house to know that it all works and everything, all the boxes are checked there. In addition to that, like I mentioned, we met with the Shoreland folks and had a great discussion with them. I do have emails from them if that's something you want to discuss more about, kind of their thoughts with the project. And then we also ran a search at the NHB database to confirm that there's no impact to threatened or endangered species for this project. As Tim mentioned, we did receive a letter late last week from Dawn with a couple comments on there. I actually think that they're going to be very easily addressed. She was asking for a number of easements. The applicants will absolutely, provide those. So there was one for the right-of-way, because Woodward Road doesn't have a 50-foot right-of-way itself, so what they like is a 25-foot easement from the center line going onto the property. That's not going to be a problem. There's a couple of drainage structures that easements will be provided for as well. She also mentioned site distance as a concern, but if you go out there and if you look at the length of Woodward Road, this is where the proposed driveway will be. You can see there's a little bit of a curvature. Woodward Road then straightens out down here. Because of where this is situated in the alignment of the road today, it actually makes for ideal site distance in both directions. So we do have to perform additional survey to prove that to her, but if you go out there and stand out there, you'll see it. We definitely will have that. I'm not concerned about that at all. I have her letter here, and can talk about that in more detail as well. I'd also be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for the presentation. Does any member of the board have any initial questions, noting that our first order of business would be to determine whether the application is complete? No questions? I have. Nelson, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would like to see the report of the Zoning Board of Adjustment on this and how their logic applied to grant this variance. This is a very strangely configured lot, gerrymander of the
Pork chop.
first-
Pork chop lot,
Well, it's not even a pork chop. It's more of a,
lamb chop.
I don't know, more of a cupcake. Whatever it is, it certainly doesn't meet the spirit of subdivision. And I'd like to know what their logic was. And both of these lots now become non-conforming after this subdivision, if I understand.
They do not, because they were granted variances.
Well, they're lawfully non-conforming.
They're
because
lawfully
of the variance.
non-conforming through the grant of the variances.
They're still non-conforming, they're just lawfully non-conforming.
Well, okay, they're,
And I understand your your desire to see their rationale. I can certainly email the minutes which have that in that, but regardless, the board doesn't have, this board doesn't have the ability to overrule them on the variance because that's a zoning issue that is in their realm.
I'd like to see their argument. Thank you. The other issue I have with it is the way the frontage of this new lot is configured. It looks like it cuts across the driveway of the existing house.
It does.
And,
It does.
and that's gonna require some easements, so why in the
There's
world
lang-
do that? Was that to get enough upland?
There's
Or-
language on the plan that says proposed driveway easement. So,
It's definitely part of the plan, I just don't know why they chose to draw the line there as opposed to keeping the driveway on one lot.
So that they have compliant frontage for both lots.
correct.
After, Nelson, I don't want to interrupt your question, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead with your question. I think I have issues with this, okay? That's all I'm saying.
I think it's also a very strange lot configuration that's meant to jump through some kind of technical hoops without necessarily being a lot that's configured in a way that's intended to be traditional or useful or, and so my question is, the initial line off of the road that cuts at a sharp angle across the driveway obviously gives you the frontage you need. This next segment of line that goes horizontally across the drawing that you have, why is that line located as southerly as it is? Why not just go straight across the piece of property with a relatively close configured line?
Do you want me to wait or
please.
to answer it now? Okay, so, Tim's correct. The first part of the line here was just to get compliant frontage. We actually went, or the attorneys and the applicant went to the Conservation Commission and brought a couple options to them as far as why, where to situate the next line. And the reason being, I'm talking about the part that you mentioned is a little bit more subtly here. The reason being is that it's just the way the regulations are written. The upland area, we wanted to give as much upland area to that existing house because it's a bigger house and it will just provide a little bit more of a market value for these folks when they go to sell it. This, the way the regulations are written is contiguous upland, so if we were to take a line and just go something like this that would be more functional, it would actually have a worse effect. You'd have technically by the book less contiguous land area on these lots just because of the way the wetlands are. So it's kind of.
Well, the northerly lot would, the southerly lot wouldn't.
Right, so,
Besides, you have a variance on the southerly lot.
correct. Well, we have variance on both lots, remember, right? So that's really, it's just meant to kind of follow, this wetland actually sticks up and there's a finger right up here. That's really just meant to, there's nothing usable in here, so it didn't, I guess in some sense, it didn't really matter where you put it because of the buffers and things like that, somewhere in this range. The attorney's suggestion was to have as compliant frontage on 2 lots just because we have enough to do that along the property here and then issue an easement for the driveway. So that was really the thought process behind that.
Sort of summarize the answer is because you wanted to.
Yeah, I think that's what I would take.
yes.
I mean, there's no reason to do it that way other than. that you-
Well, there was truly no, what would be the benefit the other way, right? Besides having a lot line that.
You'd avoid the
probably isn't
conflicts
more-
of, easements and people not
Sure.
owning all their driveway and.
Correct, but in the first part of this process, through the zoning process, there was a lot of discussion about that. And, this is, at the end of the day, they asked the attorney, what's the best chance of success for this project?
Who's attorney? What's attorney?
Bernstein, sure.
Greg
And
Michael.
He was
Greg
representing.
Greg
Michaels
Michael.
and Brett Allard.
Okay, and he was
Yep.
representing the owner here.
Correct, yes,
Yeah.
yep.
So the reason that I'm asking the question or going down this avenue is that the very sharp angled line away from the road to create enough frontage I think you're correct, or maybe even the zoning board, if they've looked at it, and look at that and say, well, technically that meets the frontage, but to me, it's certainly not within the spirit of the ordinance, and it kind of makes a mockery of things. And on that kind of a basis, you could have a lot with, 5 foot of frontage across the front of it, and
Yeah.
the house is, 2 miles out in the back woods. And I think that while we're having an opportunity to consider amendments to our regulations, this would be the kind of thing that we would write out of existence.
Sure. Now, if I can also, I'd like to add, in reality, this line, although, as you mentioned, it looks a little unusual and non-traditional, it actually kind of follows the usability of the land, right? Because you have a wetland that's essentially splitting this lower half here, the southern half, and then that northern piece. So when you think
But
about
you
it,
didn't
like,
follow the wetland, you just crossed it further back. You completely crossed the brook to the back of the lot to scoop up some land for some reason to include some area.
this right here is a wetland, just, again, with
Now,
setbacks
I understand
and
you
buffers and things
followed the
like that.
wetland there, and the argument is that that was some kind of natural barrier, but
Correct.
further to the back of the lot, you draw your line completely across the brook and scoop up some land on the other side of the brook to be part of the southern lot. And if the argument makes sense to follow the wetland on one part, why would you, on the back lot, just throw that
Well,
logic
the
away?
back lot is really kind of unusable, for the same logic of why we split it the way we did. The brook bisects the property completely. Everything that you see in the northeast corner of this property, that's not gonna be developed, right?
Yeah, I know.
You
It
know,
won't be developed, I
so-
get that.
So, it doesn't really have a bearing. It's kind of just,
Well, it does have a bearing because you're drawing the property line through that section, but you've made an argument that it was logical to follow the wetland on the southwestern part of the lot, ignoring the fact that the northeastern part of the lot throws that logic right out the window, crosses across the brook, and scoops up some land on the other side of it. And so, how much weight can I put on the argument that it made sense to follow the brook on the first part?
well, that's not the brook. That
Or
is just a
wetlands, yeah.
tributary wetland. They have different functions, right? Why it was drawn, I mean, we drew the line to get a little over 100,000 square feet of total area on this southern lot here, and just wanted to chop off only truly what was needed for that. And I know that the regulations say contiguous frontage contiguous upland, and that's how
Yeah.
everything is sized. But at the same time, why do you have soil-based lot sizing? Why do you have it? It's to prove that you have enough capacity for a septic system and all these different things to support a single-family home. When we ran the calculations, do you know how many bedrooms that this southerly lot can hold according to the state standards? It's a 3-bedroom house, mind you. It can hold 19 bedrooms by the calculations. That, to me, just, when you talk about what is the true lot size requirement, that to me is really, what can you develop on there? Well, 19 bedrooms, I mean, that's way more than enough to have one single-family home on there. So although I agree that there's some places where 100,000 square feet is probably accurate for a single-family home, this is a situation where they have certain soil types that, can accommodate a lot more than that. They just happen to be in the zone that, obviously was created, and the rules are what they are with 100,000 square feet.
This
And I think that's why
particular
the-
lot is R1 by map, if I believe.
It is,
It
yes,
is
it
not by soils, it's R1 by
Correct.
zoning map. So the soils, for the purposes of lot sizing, do not matter here.
I get that, and you've already got your variance for the
Correct.
amount of contiguous upland area, and so that isn't necessarily before us. But I am still sort of perplexed by the gimmicky lot configuration that tries to manipulate its way through the regulations in a technical sense, when doing everything that you can to find a way to make it not really a traditional building lot that you would expect
I
to
guess
see.
at the end of the day, in our discussion with the attorney and the applicant, it was just the best way to balance this new lot with what's existing today. I can't tell you there's a specific reason why that last piece jogs over to the right and cuts through a little bit of, that whole wetland, by the way, isn't the width of the brook. That's just the wetland associated with the brook. It's not like it goes through the edge of the brook or anything like that. But, it was just at the wish of the applicant and the direction of the attorney, and the variances are what they are. And, technically, these are conforming lots now, thanks to the zoning board. So, I understand the concern, I guess, but I just, we're not asking for anything else here. There's no waivers. This is by the book once you, factor in the ZBA approvals here.
Bill, you have some comments?
I do have comments, and I'm gonna hold my comments for a bit. I have a couple of questions, if I could.
Is your microphone on, sir?
No, I'm speaking off the top of my head, thank you. Talk to me a little bit about the proposed well easement.
Yeah, that's just.
Can you explain that to me, please? I've never seen a well easement
Yep.
like you've done on
Yep,
on the
that's
plan.
actually, the state requires it now for any well radius that extends over a property line. So that's only because of the state.
So the easement's for the benefit of the state,
The easement's for the benefit of the well.
or for the well?
So this property owner. So basically what it says is
Okay.
that no septic system from the other property can be built in that well radius.
I-
They used to do it a different way with a well release form, but nowadays they require an easement. So
Okay, I got you, I follow what you're saying. I guess the second question is, do you feel it's awfully tight where the proposed building is being, where you're proposing to build a house as it relates to where the well is and where the proposed septic system is going to be? It just seems it's awfully crowded if you've got issues in there if the well dries out or if the septic fails.
Well, one of the things we have to do in the course of design is factor in for the, if the septic system does fail, is there enough room on the lot to support another one? And as I mentioned to you, with the soil types that we have here, there's more than enough. It's plentiful in that regard. I guess you could consider it tight, I guess. That's why we did such, a large amount of due diligence getting to this point to make sure that this lot could actually support a single-family home. I don't want to discredit that. They've jumped through a lot of hoops that a lot of people don't jump through to get to this point. And so what we did is we really, crossed our Ts and dotted our Is in terms of the environmental stuff, the setbacks, everything that we need to do there to make sure that it can support this lot, and I feel very confident in that.
Do you have adequate land, let me retract and rephrase. Do you expect that the proposed driveway is going to be built there? The reason why I ask is if you can't build the driveway there, would you be seeking an easement through the town of Merrimack to access their right-of-way to gain access to your lot?
I'm not sure why the driveway wouldn't be able to be built there. That was one of the things that we looked at, but no, they don't have any interest in that. Are you concerned with Dawn's comment about site distance, or? guess-
Partly, yeah.
Okay.
Partly, yep. Because I drive that road, I run that road, I know it very well.
Yep.
And, yeah, I'm going to get reprimanded right now, so.
No, I was just going to say that the reason for Don's comment initially was that driveway location is not on the actual submitted plans. It's in this presentation
Right.
plan, but there was no driveway location indicated on the plans for this lot, which is why the site distance concern was raised.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, please.
Just a follow-up comment, if I could. I gather from listening to some of my colleagues here tonight that this is a somewhat bizarre lot configuration, but in my experience, this is not the first time that I've seen something like this. As a former title examiner, I've seen this in Rockingham County, I've seen it down in Massachusetts, I've seen it specifically used down on the Cape for planned unit developments down there so that they comply with the spirit of zoning down in other parts. So this, to me, I'm not really perplexed by this, to be honest with you, because when you drive Woodward Road, it's not like you're gonna see a white picket fence that's gonna look like that, and people are gonna go by going, wow, that's an oddly configured lot, because when people drive by Woodward Road, they're gonna see nothing but woods in Babusick Brook, and that is it. It's not like they're gonna be building a fence there that's gonna define the house lot. It's gonna blend in with the topography there.
I actually
So-
think that to piggyback on that, if that line wasn't through this finger wetland here, you'd run into more issues down the road with the northerly property putting things over the line or in a setback or something like that.
I'm not sure
moving a
you would.
shed, adding a
because
shed
there's-
or something.
I mean, there's requirements that you do that, but, Bill, I get what you're saying, that this is a line on a map, and on the ground, it won't even show or be there. But at the end of the day, when you create a lot that looks like this, now you invite yourself to have the applicant come forward for new variances and say, oh, I want to build my pool or my shed a little closer to, because this is all I've got, this is all the land I got, look at the way my lot's so peculiarly configured, and with the layout of this land, I just need this relief. And you didn't need the relief until you divided up the lot this way. And that's one of the concerns about these peculiar flag lot, pork chop lot kinds of things, is the next story that comes, which may be a long time in the future, maybe years from now, when somebody comes forward and says, oh, well, gee, I want to do something a little bit different on my property, give me some relief because of the way it's shaped. And the time to avoid that is right now when you're
Now.
creating the shape of that lot. So that you're not setting yourself up for someone to say, whatever it may be, I want to put a pool in and there's no room to do it, or I want to do a shed or whatever.
Right.
That's
So-
the reason for having concern about this kind of lot shape.
The one thing I will caution the board on is the variances for each of these lots was specific to the amount of contiguous upland that both contain. So you really cannot shift those lot lines around without impacting the variance that's already been granted.
I get it.
Could I also add, Mr. Chairman, that God forbid that somebody in the new house, which you built where it is, has an accident needing an ambulance, or they set the house on fire. I would hate to be the fire engine driver who's got to back his engine all the way back down that road. I don't see you've got room for vehicles, bigger vehicles, to turn round. Now, you may challenge it, but I still say there isn't enough room at the end of there for the house and for anything of any substance to get in there.
That is illustrative purposes only. We're only talking about the lot. The planning board does not have jurisdiction over where the house is constructed or any of that on a single-family lot.
Yeah, but I'm
I do
expressing a
understand what you-
practical concern, which I would never know my friend down the back might even say it. You have to think of all emergencies. And I mean, this is just going to be a small lot, ideally maybe suited to an elderly couple because they don't want all the yard work. And that is a very tight lot, and if something goes wrong, you're going to have a hell of a job getting emergency vehicles down there. I'm only making a comment. I don't like this lot, and I'm just seeing all the issues that could arise.
I agree with both you and with Tim that as much as I see the issue, and it may be the fire department can consider it when someone's applying for a permit for their driveway or whatever, it's an important issue, but it's not one that we can attack.
I realize that, Mr. Chairman.
No, and I think that the variances that have been granted probably prevent some of the other criticisms that I'm bringing forward as well, but doesn't mean I can't have say my piece while I'm here. One of the first things we have to do, and maybe we've talked about it enough or maybe not, is decide whether the application's complete. And is the board prepared to that question, or would have any more questions of the applicant to decide completeness?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that the application is complete enough for consideration of the board.
Seconded.
Second by Councillor Boyd. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 6-0-0 to find the application complete. No waivers have been requested, and I think the applicant's been very clear about that they've gotten the relief that they need from the ZBA. Are there other questions that the board has with respect to the way that the...
Well, I suppose the question I've got
Something's
is,
confusing.
have you read the memo which appears to say that you're going to have to grant easements for the town for putting in pipes, and that the town of Bedford, because they're redoing that bridge, which is to the sort of right where Woodward Road becomes Beals Road, they're redoing that bridge before it falls down. You're going to have to grant a fair amount of concessions to the town. They'll be seeking, the town of Bedford, I know it's not our responsibility, but I don't see any point in crashing ahead when there's going to be an issue with the Bedford town are going to be approaching you. Have you thought about the implications?
I believe you're referring to the easements mentioned in Don's letter?
Yes.
Yes, all of those will be granted. They don't have any hesitation about that or anything. I mean, they're giving Dawn exactly what she wants to do the things that, quite frankly, the town needs to be able to do. Widen Woodward Road, replace culverts if needed.
Okay.
Replace a bridge. I mean, they're completely on board with all of those things.
All right.
Thank you, Alistair, for the question. Other comments or questions?
Will you seek public comment?
Yeah, we do. We
Yeah,
haven't done
yeah,
the public hearing
yeah.
yet. but-
Oh, I see, you got to accept, you want to accept it first.
Well, we did that. We just accepted
just
it.
accepted,
Now we're
okay.
having a little discussion, then we'll do a
Okay.
public hearing, and then
Okay,
we'll
all right, I'm with you.
take up that. But is the board got any more questions for the applicant?
No,
All right, then let's
Just
have a-
one thing from the applicant, you offered some emails from the Wetlands Bureau?
Yep, Shoreline Bureau.
Shoreline?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep, and just to discuss that a little bit, basically what we did is we ran through all the shoreline calculations, because again, that was a concern of ours that we had to vet, and we did that. So we ran through all of those. We took those findings, brought them up, met with the state, had a great discussion with them. They agreed with our findings. They list some things here. This is basically an email that our wetland scientists summarized, meeting minutes, things like that, with them, sent it to them, and then they said, yep, that's basically what we said, with one caveat. They have a rule that you have to have 150 feet of shoreline frontage, which this has about 500 feet because of the shape of the brook. So they just wanted to add that one thing that they didn't talk about during their meeting. But yeah, I have the email chain with me. I'd be happy to pass that.
You'd like to have a
Yeah.
copy, yeah, for the record?
Do you want me to now, or? Yeah.
Give it-
You
yeah.
just submit it to Tim, we'll pass it around while the meeting. Other comments or questions? Let's open up the floor and see if there's any public members who wish to comment on the proposal. Are there any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in? Don't go far. It looks like there's nobody that wants to comment. Going once, going twice. Okay, we'll close the public hearing, Paul. Thank you for that opportunity. I have to say, I'm thankful that you brought this colored map in here. There's no way that I would discern any of those boundaries and lines based on the map that I have. There's quite a bit of repetitive use of line styles and weights. And as much as I tried to study it and follow where the edge of wetlands or the edge of the brook is, I couldn't do it. And I'd like to see if we can talk our way through a plan that is clearer to read and understand as one that would ultimately be signed. I follow that the yellow colored area on your map is wetland.
Correct.
Why is there a green strip that runs through the middle of part of the brook through there? Yeah.
Yeah, that is the edge of the shoreland. So that's where the setbacks, they have a 50-foot setback, a 150-foot setback, and a 250-foot setback. It's actually measured from that. So what we have to do is, our wetland scientist has to go out and actually determine where the top of the bank of that brook is. We survey, he puts a flag down, we surveyed it, and then we get our setbacks from that. So that line is just to easily point out that that's what those are measured from.
Okay, so that green line is more or less the edge
Top
of
of
the
the bank.
brook,
Yep.
but there's some wetlands that extend beyond the bank of
Correct.
the brook through there.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the edge of the brook, that dark green line that you've used to make the edge of the brook versus the wetlands seems to stop when it encounters the red new property line.
Correct.
Can we continue that to wherever its natural end would be?
So the reason for that is, shoreland only requires that because the development that's going to happen is only on this new lot, that's where that ends. So that's where we stopped it. It's just a matter of, cost versus what do you get back for that money. And so I know that was one of Don's comments. I mean, if that's something that would help make the board, I guess, feel a little bit more comfortable here. It really doesn't add any value in my professional opinion, because nothing changes on that northern lot. And if something ever were to, that would have to be determined. But, we do have to go out and get some additional survey on Woodward Road to actually pull together the site distance plan anyway. If that's something that, if we made that a condition of approval or something, we could probably agree to that.
I'm interested in having it done for a couple reasons. First of all, it makes the map, the plan easier to read, so I understand what's out there. But also, if we don't do that, then the northerly lot becomes a approved lot of record that doesn't bear the setback lines that are necessary to it. And it could create the impression that the edge of the brook isn't defined through there, or it isn't defined where it is.
Except that those setbacks don't apply to the northerly lot because
Correct.
it's not being further developed.
It's not being further developed today.
Today.
But
yeah.
if
But
it
it
is.
becomes a permanent lot of record with this map on it, and then
Yes.
someone says, hey, I think I'll expand back and add a bedroom onto my house. And nobody's gonna call DES and worry about wetland permits because there's a recorded map of record that doesn't show any setbacks from wetlands there.
Well, again, it doesn't have a bearing on what's being proposed here, but if it's something that you want to see added, we can add it, but it doesn't really change the discussion here tonight.
Fair
And I
enough.
understand what you're saying about in the future and all that. I understand that.
I like the way you phrase that. We don't have to agree on whether it has a bearing or not. I'm glad that you're willing to put it on there, and I'd like to have it. I think it does have a bearing on what's going on here, but we don't have to agree on that,
Okay.
as long as you're willing to add it. Other members of the board have any other additional comments or questions? There are no waivers requested, and so if there's no more comments or questions, it's appropriate for the board to consider its final disposition of the application one way or another.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Tim had indicated that because DPW had concerns that this was gonna be continued date certain to September.
Tim, does the comments about the driveway location resolve any of that, or do you want to make sure that we
They're
tackle
not
it
my,
first?
they're not my comments to say one way or the other, but from my perspective, the willingness of the applicant to address all of these comments is enough for me to feel comfortable if you decide to go conditional approval.
If I may, if we don't have site distance, we have to come back before you anyway to ask for a waiver. So, it's something that, which, again, I feel 100% confident that there is that. I grew up on Woodward Road. I know that area very well. I know what we have there. I've been out to the site numerous times. I'm not concerned about that at all, but just, you can kind of rest assured knowing that if for whatever reason that doesn't work out, we do have to come back here and ask for relief from that, so.
And the easements were already discussed as part of Don's memo,
Yep.
but they've agreed to those,
Correct.
so. I'm just trying to make sure that we have a comfort level, and if you do, then I'm
I do.
appropriate with that, okay.
We have legal review of the easements.
That's a standard condition of all. That's
Yeah,
proposed condition number 4.
thank you.
Other comments or questions by members of the board?
I was going to say, before a motion gets made, based on the conversation that's happened, I've made a note that we want added, that the reference line for Babusick Brook be added to the northern lot, including all shoreline setbacks.
Yes, thank you for that. I don't think that we added any other new conditions tonight. I appreciate you doing the color, like I said, color drawing, especially making the lot lines and the proposed lot line very, very bolded and broad on that colored one. It's much easier to read and to understand with that. Okay, board, what's the will?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the planning board grant conditional final approval to the application with the following precedent conditions to be fulfilled within 6 months and prior to the plan signing, as specified with the 11 items outlined in Robert Price's August 1st, 2019 memorandum to you and the members of the planning board.
Plus the condition added here tonight.
Thank you.
Is there a second for that motion? Dan seconds the motion. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of conditional final approval, subject to the conditions mentioned, say aye.
Aye.
Very reluctantly, aye.
Reluctantly as well. Any opposed?
Very reluctant.
Were you yes or opposed?
Oh, I'll go opposed.
Go
You've
opposed.
already passed.
Any abstaining? So that is 5-1 to grant conditional final approval. I'm very reluctant to approve it as well, but I realize that you've met the technical requirements of the regulations, and I'm glad to have on our agenda tonight an opportunity to open the hood on those regulations and
Not quite,
address
but
this particular
sometime in the
kind of
next
thing.
6 to 8 months, yes.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
And I understand, and thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. Okay, item number 6 on our agenda is Merrimack Parcel A as LLC as the applicant and owner. Review for an amendment to the previously approved mixed-use site plan for Phase 1 of the Merrimack Park Place project, proposing an additional 32 multifamily residential units and removal of 84,200 square feet of office and restaurant space, specialty retail, and an event center from Phase 1 to be included in a subsequent phase. The parcel is located at 10 Premium Outlets Boulevard in the I-2 Industrial and Aquifer Conservation Districts and Wellhead Protection Area, Tax Map 3C, Lot 191-2, Case Planning Board 2019-25. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Just to give a brief refresher on the history on where we are with this. You may recall back in February, the planning board granted an approval to an amendment to the conditional use permit for the Merrimack Park Place conditional use, mixed-use project. Actually, those plans are here and ready for the planning board to sign tonight. You may also recall that there was a application made several months ago to amend the site plan, which was subsequently withdrawn. This is now being resubmitted. The current plan is proposing the construction of 224 multifamily units, consistent with the amended CUP that was granted back in February, 7,600 square feet of restaurant space, and the 120-room hotel. The remainder of that project will be built out in future phases, including potentially other non-residential uses and parking structure as necessary, depending on what moves forward at that stage. The parking study for this was approved as part of the CUP. That shared parking study calls for 611 spaces as part of Phase 1, and they're providing 704 spaces under this site plan application. The biggest bone of contention from the staff point of view is that the plan is showing access to Continental Boulevard, crossing over the portion of the Camp Sargent Road right-of-way, which was a remnant from the days before Continental Boulevard existed. Based on the previous design, there was a desire to look at using part of that right-of-way area to prevent having to relocate the emergency access and to allow for some parking to take place. Given the redesign of the project with the residential use being the southern part of the property, there is no need to utilize that space for the purposes the board desired. So the town manager has indicated that there is no longer an interest on the town's part to allow usage of that portion of the Camp Sargent Road right-of-way. Public Works has also provided, as you'll see in the memo, some very strong reasons why they do not support making a connection to Camp Sargent Road. Beyond that, we are still awaiting peer review for the revised application. So we will respectfully request the board defer final decisions on this until we have the peer review comments in hand. So when we get to the appropriate stage, we'd be recommending a continuance out to the September meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself and tell us where we're at with the project.
Yep. Good evening. My name is Dave Fenstermacher. I am the project manager, civil engineer for this project from VHB. And I think Tim did a good job summarizing where we are. I know we've been in front of you a few times, but we're really here tonight to talk about this new site plan layout. We were here back in February to focus on the Phase 1, which included the apartments, some office, retail, restaurant, and the hotel. This new layout, as you can see, has the new building layout, the U-shaped with some under building parking, the hotel and the restaurant. So these uses fit within the CUP. It's just a different allocation of what was previously presented to the board. Just real quick, I just want to break down. We have the 224 units in this U-shaped. There's a 7,000 square foot clubhouse. You can see these are all amenities for the residents of the apartment. The 120 room hotel and 7,600 square foot restaurant. In terms of access, this is consistent with what's been shown in the past. We have the roundabout, keeping this as tight as we can over here to maintain as much buffer to the residential area. We are showing the fire access, and that's the existing fire access. I know there was a previous version which showed this moved closer to the north. This is going to maintain the existing fire access. And then as we head just to the main parking field, as Tim mentioned, we have ample parking per the regulations. Just a few other items. In terms of stormwater, this site has an approved AOT permit from the state, and we're maintaining the same treatment patterns and methods, and it's really this oversized pond along the main entrance. So we'll be adjusting the conveyance, but there's no change in the impervious. So we'll just send an amended plan to DES following this, just for their records related to the conveyance of the water to the stormwater features. Again, erosion control will remain the same as what's been previously approved. In the application, we did have the fiscal impact report that's been revised for this Phase 1 portion that shows that it's still a net fiscally positive development with the three uses. Traffic, again, this is because we're not changing anything from the approved CUP or the previously approved site plan. The roundabout and the entrance can handle the capacity of this, or have the capacity to handle this development. I know there's some follow-up with DOT that's taking place now, just to confirm some of the numbers there. We did meet with the fire department and water and sewer. The result of the meeting with the fire department was the implementation of this fire access road around the building. And that's really to provide that full access around the building. Continental Boulevard. Though we're on the corner, the distance from the roadway from Continental Boulevard and Industrial was a concern with them, with the vehicles and the trucks to reach the building. So the applicant was willing to add this fire access around the building. And water and sewer, again, consistent with what was previously submitted in terms of demand for this first phase. So limited comments there. And for landscaping, you can see we, enhanced the landscape plan. And again, I know everyone's really focused on the northern piece. We're maintaining all the existing buffer that's up there. Nothing's changed from what's been done previously. I know Mr. Monahan has even done some enhancements, supplemental plantings that are out there at this time. So I think that's the overview. I just want to reiterate that the remaining 3-acre piece, that tonight we're here for approval for the site plan, and that anything that happens in that we understand will come back as part of a site plan approval for what's going to go there. So any concerns with that can be handled by the planning board when that final design has
Well,
been advanced.
I agree with that in part, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Let me
Okay.
let you finish first.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll finish. I think we're good. I think it covers everything.
Thank you for the presentation. Do you have any comments on Tim's comment about the access to Continental Boulevard and the challenges that's presented?
Yeah, I think if you can see, I took it
Eliminated
off the rendering. So what we did, it was on the plan. We showed it as a dashed potential, and it was really just to start that conversation. And as you advance through our plan set, it wasn't on the plan set. It was more on there for informational purposes. And after reading the first couple pages of the staff report, I think
Yeah.
we got the input.
I think I'm glad that won't be an issue of contention going forward, that you'll be seeking access that you wouldn't be able to get through property that belongs to the town. And
Yeah, we've designed the
Basically,
whole
so-
site
I think it's
that
fine.
it would work without
Yeah.
without that connection.
I think my next comment is that your previous layout had that kind of Main Street feel where there was going to be kind of a mall
boulevard.
corridor through the middle with some things on both sides, and I thought it was very interesting. And this one is a little bit more simple and a little bit more separated from the layout. And aesthetically, I think I liked the other one better, but we don't vote on aesthetics, and so you don't owe me any explanation for the aesthetics. This certainly meets the uses that you're permitted with this. And I understand the market forces that might have encouraged you to make a decision this way. So the rest of the layout of the site and the sidewalks and the access by the fire trucks and all of those things seem reasonable to me. The main question I have really is that 3-acre undeveloped Phase 2 area, because what you've got left in your grab bag within the CUP is an event center and a bunch of offices. And putting that closer to the neighbors who are considering impacts and noise and all of that, as opposed to the residential, which was what abutted them before, may be an impact that they weren't expecting. Because you look at this and you say, well, there's nothing there, and that'll be great.
Right.
It'll be an open field. But then you're going to come back to us with Phase 2 and say, well, we're going to put an event center, and we're going to do weddings and have live music back here, or whatever you do at an event center. And then the neighbors are going to be here telling us all kinds of things about why we shouldn't do that. And
Right.
you'll tell us, well, it was in the CUP and that's all we have left in our CUP. Why can't we do it? So tell me a little bit about how this will all work out in Phase 2.
Let me. Actually, I can bring up.
Thank you for putting up the elevations, by the way, and I'm not ignoring them. They're just
Oh, I
displayed
know.
behind you as well, so I can see them.
So we did do a concept for the future Phase 2, and what this one shows is, I think the intent of the CUP originally with the event center was something associated with the hotel,
Hotel.
not to be up here. So that's something we probably have to revisit with the hotel, depending on who the end user of the hotel is, if that's something that wants to get implemented there. But what we're envisioning over here now is a first floor of restaurant and retail, and then the office on the stories above it, and then the parking garage. The parking garage, what we're showing now is similar to what was in the previous plan. And again, respecting the previous setbacks that were there, the 200-foot, leaving in the existing vegetation and the fire lane. So, you know, these were some of the concerns before, I think, were the balconies and the views, the people on the balconies and noise from there. With the office use on the higher levels, you know, that's more of a 9 to 5, limited during the day, and then the retail will be on the lower level. And this is where we try to kind of recreate some of that street feel to it, where people could come in and park and, you know, access the retail on that first floor.
So the phase two, when it comes forward, at least the current plan for phase two is some retail, office, and a parking garage, but no event center?
No, the original, in the part of the original CUP, the event center was associated with the hotel, and I can't imagine the event center would then be associated with the hotel in this portion of the
I'd be
site.
satisfied with that answer, but then as a condition of site plan approval, if Tim tells me I could require you to do this, amend the CUP to eliminate the event center as one of the permitted uses, so that it doesn't come back as being a proposed change to this going forward.
Okay. Yeah, that's a Tom answer, Mr. Monahan. And I think the hotel, as we show it now, where it did previously have the event center associated with the hotel, I think the end users that Mr. Monahan's talking to now are happy with the way the hotel is laid out now.
I know we're not at site plan approval for phase two yet, and this is just kind of conceptual, but I know
Yep.
that the neighbors' interests are in headlights and noise and those kinds of things. I think that you're correct that an office use probably is less noisy, no balconies, less nighttime noise,
Yep.
those kinds of things. That's all good.
It's a shorter building.
Whenever there is a site plan for this, there'll be some expectation that managing where headlights flow and go around the parking garage and that sort of thing will be important to us to know and understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to what we presented the last time, that there's things that you can implement on the parking garage with screening that can really limit that.
Okay. So your answers to the questions about phase two that I've had so far, I like your answers, and I want to hear more from what the neighbors, what they think about it. We'll do a public hearing here in a minute, but
Okay.
thank you for that. I don't know if any other members of the board have some questions and
Well,
thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry about this, but when we did the outlet mall, we knew what the whole development was likely to be, including a phase two, which they haven't yet to build. But at least we knew what was going in there. I would not happy to sign off on a set of plans with an open space which may have something in the future. I'm sorry, that doesn't seem to me to ring with. I mean, I know you can probably tell me I'm wrong, but it seems to me before we agree to this, we should know exactly what's going in that open space, as we did with the outlet mall. I just can't see why we're bending the rule or changing the rules or changing the organisation so that nobody knows what's going in there.
No, we do. That's
Well-
where the CUP approval came from. He had a grab bag list of things that were going to be in there.
This is not the same type
we've
of
approved
CUP that the outlet mall had. This is a mixed-use CUP, similar to Flatley and those other, and
That's,
Edgebrook.
which
Those
is
are the-
why I was suggesting amending it to take out the event center if that's not going to be one of the choices.
This community needs an event center. And just the fact that you're willing to entertain taking that off of the CUP is tremendously disappointing, Mr. Chairman. And I think.
Whether
No.
the community needs it or not, I think it's figuring out what's appropriate on this particular site.
I understand that, but that was, the event center was part of the original, some of the things that was originally talked to as it relates to phase two. And I think and I saw that Mr. Monahan was amenable to that. But from where I sit and how our community has been growing over the last couple of years, it's one of the things that at the town council level, and I'm sure it's also included in our master plan, that having, access for this community to have access to an event center certainly is a need. Whether or not Mr. Monahan wants to build is a totally different story, but at least he should have the flexibility to be able to do that if it fits into his business model.
If I
So-
could just,
I'm satisfied with it being in his business model if you configure the site in a way that doesn't impact the neighbors, but when you reverse it, that's what changes the puzzle.
the amended CUP that you and Alistair will be signing tonight, the master site development plan does not have an event center on it. So that is no longer in the mix for the CUP already, based on the
Okay,
amendment.
already been dealt with.
It's a mood issue.
Other comments or questions by members of the board? Thank you for bringing it up, Bill. Nelson?
well, maybe it can come later, but the memo that that Robert Price prepared regarding this refers to a memo from the Public Works dated 31 July, and that was not included in the packet. And I would like to see that at some point. It just wasn't in our package, and it's an internal thing more than affects the,
Actually, if I may, because Robert's memo is dated August 1st, if you look under item 10 in the staff memo,
Yeah.
that contains all of the items that were in Don's memo on the 31st.
I thought it might, but I didn't know.
Thank you for clarifying that, Tim and Nelson. Other comments or questions, Nelson?
No, not at the moment, Mr. Chairman. Just questions, yeah, since we're on questions.
7:30.
The fiscal impact that's included here and the traffic analysis that's included in this package, that's being peer reviewed, I presume, by,
The traffic, yes, the peer review for the fiscal is actually based on the previous, just having, it's a matter of subtracting uses. So I've been comparing it to the previously approved fiscal with the conditional use permit and looking at the numbers jive with what's included versus what was not included. So with the amendments, the positive number gets reduced from what it was previously in the first phase, but it's still showing a positive impact of about $173,000 per year under phase one.
yeah, I did see that, and I just wondered if
And that
somebody had
review was
scrubbed it.
actually done in-house by staff, as it was for the CUP.
The staff did it for the CUP as well?
Correct.
Okay, so I had some questions at that time when we did it.
Yep. And I know we had a big back and forth discussion on, because the initial peer review, the initial CUP fiscal was peer reviewed, and the changes were so minor that staff was comfortable handling those rather than having to spend additional funds to have the peer review done on that.
Okay, so
And based on the vote of the board at that point, the board agreed and approved it under that guise with the staff reviewing the fiscal amendment.
Okay, maybe I could go over that sometime. I'd like to just see it again.
If I recall, I believe I emailed you a bunch of documents after that meeting to go over the previous fiscal reviews.
It's coming back slowly, thank you.
I know what that's like. Other comments or questions?
That's all for now.
If there are no other comments or questions, let's open up the floor to the public and take some testimony as a public hearing. Are there any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in? Okay.
Just so
Dave, you want to let them have the table?
Oh, yeah, do they go up here or here? Is hers on over there?
Good evening, Nancy Harrington, 11 Spruce Street. First of all, I want to thank you for pursuing the second phase. And I think you're correct. I think those two projected uses would be okay, the abutters. Those kinds of consideration or issues had previously been dealt with before, so I think that would be sufficient. The only little concern I have is I am right in back of the Rotary. There
Over
we
here?
go. Yeah, I'm right, yeah.
Okay.
Literally, you go like this, that's my house.
Okay.
Okay. Now, there's a berm there. It resolves the problem. I know that you're going to go into it a little bit. I'm not saying you can't and that you shouldn't. I'm just concerned, in the future, I will be looking at how much in. Only because it's not so much the height, but on either end it goes down. And depending upon the angle of the lights coming in and out, it may impact, it may not. I just don't know yet. It depends on but that would be my only concern in terms of the movement of that rotary does affect the entrance a little bit, which changes the angle of the lights coming in and out. That's my only concern.
Thank you for that, Nancy. Tim, that raises another question in my mind. My memory is that the Rotary is on the other parcel.
Correct, it's on the Premium Outlets parcel. That project was granted approval by the board previously.
It is, if we're moving the Rotary even slightly, is that
We're
going to
not.
require an amendment?
We're not moving the rotary.
I thought you said today when I talked to you, it is.
There's indication on the plan to show the driveway off of the rotary is what's causing that, but it's
This-
within the property within this property is where that impact is, not
Oh,
on
I
the-
see. I
Yeah,
got
there's
you.
nothing, yeah.
So
Okay.
nothing's changing on the MPO side of
So-
the
Right.
parcel. This is all
So
on
it's the
the.
actual road, it's not the rotary per se. It's the road coming in,
A little bit of, yeah.
okay, which would cut in at just the right, that's all my only concern.
Okay.
It makes sense.
Which could be remedied by certain configuration of the berm that's there. I mean, I'm not saying the road, might be fine, but there'd have to be some modification in to be able to prevent the lighting.
Yep.
That's all.
And I'm sure contractors, if they have excess soil, that'd be a really good use. Potentially add to the berm over there.
Excellent.
Okay, that's my
Well,
only
excellent
concern.
consideration. We'll take that one up a little bit more. Thank you, Nancy, for
Thank
taking
you.
comments or questions, for Nancy? Thank you for that. Any other citizens and abutters who wish to weigh in? Ms. Burns, please come forward.
I'm Beth Burns. I live at 5 Spruce. And I just want to note, I don't agree with an event center being behind my house, as I think most homeowners would agree with. Are we at an agreement tonight where that has been taken off the table?
It's not included in the CUP that they're signing off on, that has
So,
already
yeah.
been approved by the board.
Okay,
It's
so
out.
that should not be a concern of mine anymore as a resident, that I'm going to have an event center built there, listening to who knows what till all ends of the night. Am I
Not without
correct?
them coming back and putting it back in.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I think he would agree himself with his own home. I mean, it's not our job as a community to entertain people and have all kinds of action going on behind a resident's home. I believe we deserve the respect of having a quiet in our backyard and remain with as much privacy as we can. I think that's only fair. First off, I wanted to note tonight that I do appreciate Tom's effort in the evergreens that we planted. I know they've kind of become everbrowns, which I can't blame on Tom because it has happened in other yards as well, but due to the winter. So, that I'm not really, I've kind of pushed that aside. How many, no matter what ends up going, so as I don't even have my notebook with me now, so we may have a little retail in an office basically in phase 2. Is that correct?
Yes.
That would still require any parking, anything at all to remain, how many feet away from the buffer? And the
So-
emergency exit itself, that's to remain?
There's 2 parts to the answer. There's a 200-foot buffer that's required by regulation that's never going to change.
Okay,
I think that the position of their road is actually probably 250 or 270 or something like that, and they've made a commitment to keep it there here tonight. And whenever that parking comes forward, there'll be a planning board site plan review, just like tonight, to consider that upper corner, and we'll all have a look at it and make sure that we're all satisfied with however it's configured. So that's as best I can give, kind of three different parts, not two, 3 different parts to the answer to what goes on with that buffer.
okay.
The
And-
200-foot requirement is absolutely, it can't be violated by them in a proposal. It's a requirement in the regulations. The location of their road is a little bit beyond that, and then anything that they build is a little bit beyond that too, so.
Okay. What do you mean, anything they build is a little beyond that, meaning closer
Physically-
to us?
No, physically, their road is a little bit further
Physically
away, and then
further,
their building will be
okay.
a little further away yet.
Okay, and I think that's reasonable on both ends.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're considering the developable area now is the area between the existing fire road and the development.
Okay,
With respecting the existing buffer that's to the north.
okay. All right.
Does that help? Thank you very much
All right, thank
for your
you.
testimony, and I anticipated your thoughts about the event center, and that's where my comments were coming from.
Hi, Barb Jelinas. Just got married. I got to get used to that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
1 Spruce Street. I just wanted to reiterate thanks for bringing up Phase 2. I was very concerned about having that empty no man's land there, and I agree with what Nancy said, that I think the parking garage and the office space will not be bad, for lack of a better word, for we abutters back there. I do have a question about what that curvy
That's the existing,
is that
oh, that's a walkway. Sorry,
It's just a walkway,
That's a
okay.
sidewalk to go around the site.
Okay.
Yeah, we made them do that in previous phases because we like
Yeah.
sidewalks.
I had something else. Oh,
Take
yeah,
it.
I'm also very glad that the event center is gone too.
Fair enough.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
Other abutters who wish to weigh in?
Hi, Rick Foote, 129 Indian Rock Road. I like the other people, I'm a bit more pessimistic about this. The fact that it's approved, there's no doubt about that. Whether they make any changes to it down the road or not, who knows? But the basic thing will be approved. I'm always a bit fascinated by open spots like that. The developer is not going to make any money if he leaves it open like that. So whether he has some plan for it now or 2 or 3 years down the road, he's going to come back with something that he wants to put there. And the question mark, will it be good for the residents that live right there? My thoughts are no, it won't be, but the developers usually come out ahead on these ones. That's how it usually goes, at least in my book it seems to be. The other thing I always worry about is all the traffic. It never seems to be that no matter what project goes in, traffic is always not I don't want to say it's not a consideration. They always do their traffic studies that say, yep, no problem, it'll be okay. And it doesn't seem to matter how many cars get added to the mix, it's always okay. And I find that amazing that, it doesn't matter what they do, how many cars get added, it's not going to be a problem. So I look at these things and just say, great, that's more stuff we need in town. To me, I never see any benefit to it. It's always, they look at it and say, well, it's tax positive. That kind of depends on how you look at it. My taxes still go up every year. I guess just less so if they didn't build these things. So my 2 cents for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Other abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in?
Good evening. I want to start by saying it's always an experience coming here to these meetings, having attended, I believe, every planning board meeting pertaining to this site, and realizing that every time we come, there's a brand-new plan that's being presented for us to consider. I like this plan. I think it takes care of a lot of the problems that we as abutters and the neighborhood has. I think that having located or relocated the property is an intelligent and meaningful way to proceed. I do have a couple of questions, though. What is the distance from that tree line, and hopefully those are evergreens and not everdeads, between the trees and the access road, not the access road, but the emergency access road? What's the distance there?
Yep. So at the public hearing, you ask questions of us, and we'll entertain them as best
Okay.
we can, but it's not dialogue back and forth between you and the applicant. But I
Well,
took note of your question.
let me present it this way. May I present to the board that there should be some discussion concerning what the distance is between the trees and the access road? Because to us, a neighborhood, we look at that and it looks like quite a distance, but we don't know what that is in feet. I've heard my neighbors stand up and say, and I certainly agree with them, that looks like a good plan. But I don't know if that's 20 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet, 1,000 feet. And I think that should be part of this presentation to us this evening. What is that distance? And if I can't ask the question, may I ask someone, please, on the board, please to ask that question so that we know what it is.
200 feet.
200 feet, thank you very much.
I think that's a little bit different than what he asked. But we'll take it up here in a second.
You scale it off,
At-
you
at-
scale it off this line, yeah.
Property line, oh, from there.
Here to here is what he's looking for.
Oh, because he was talking about the access road.
The access road down is what-
Mike, we'll get you the question.
We'll
I
get you a
misread.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. At the last meeting, this board stated unequivocally that it wanted something to offset the cost to the town of residential apartments going in, and they wanted to be sure that the commercial space was part of the same phase. And I remember sitting here and having this board insist that Phase 1 include the commercial space. Have we waived that? And if we have waived that, could I ask this board to please explain to us residents in Merrimack the logic behind that, please? We've talked about increasing the number of units in this project. Having sat here this evening, I have not heard anything about how many parking spots are being allocated to this project. The last time this project came before us, it was on a shared parking system. Are we talking about a shared parking system here? Are we talking about meeting the code requirements as set forth by the town that sets forth how many parking spots are required per apartment? I have heard absolutely no discussion of that at all. And again, I ask the planning board, would someone please address these issues so we know where we are on that? I think that's a reasonable request. Traffic. At the one of the previous planning board meetings, I brought up the fact that the town police department, the police chief in particular, was very concerned about the traffic. One of the citizens here in the town of Merrimack just addressed that. What does this do to the traffic? How many cars are we now talking about going around the cul-de-sac? Does this plan address the police department's concern that there should be three roads coming into this project to eliminate any potential for 1 to 2 hour traffic jams that the police chief stated was a possibility in approving a plan of this nature? Does this address that in any way? And if it does, would someone please explain to us how that addresses it? You know, we all sit in traffic all day long, and is this just another traffic jam? And the final thing is, I kind of alluded to it, but I haven't heard, what is the cost to the town to approve a project where there's no offsetting commercial space to offset the cost of this? What is the impact on the school system? What's the impact on our tax rate? Would someone please address that so that we as citizens watching this program have some idea about how this planning board is moving ahead when plans are presented to the board? I'd like to hear something that assures me that the proper thought process has gone into it and that our concerns have been addressed before there's a vote that's taken to either approve or reject this. I like this plan. I like the movement of the apartments, but I think there's a lot more concerns that have to be addressed at the same time, and I respectfully ask the board to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Other abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in? That's it? Got them all? Going once, going twice? Okay. We'll close the public hearing. Let me ask Dave to respond to the inquiries and comments that have been made by the public, and as you go through them, if there's any that you overlook, we'll do our best to kind of remind you and touch base on and let you get addressed.
Okay. I can remember everybody, but yeah, I think the berm that we talked about, the lighting concerns at the roundabout. You know, this is still consistent with what was submitted previously, but, you know, taking into account some of those concerns, I think that's something that can be looked into. And as she said, it's hard to tell right now what that would be, but, you know, I think Mr. Monahan and the Lascesi Group would be, you know, willing to enhance that berm as needed, depending on what we find out there.
That makes a lot of sense, and I know that we're going to ultimately continue this to receive some more comments, but I'm going to have to ask you to firm up the whatever it might be, just because we only get to look at it while you're here.
Yep.
And whatever changes to the berm or the lighting or trees or shrubs, fence, whatever you use to try to keep the headlights at bay, we only get to look at it here on the plan, and
Okay.
that's our only chance.
So, yeah, so we'll take a look at enhancing that based on the existing conditions and how we can work it into the design.
And it may be just showing us what the elevation is of that berm and how tall.
Yep.
That may be that
And
it
the width of it, yeah.
solves that question already.
Okay. And then the event center, I think that's been addressed appropriately. I think we addressed the sidewalk and the event center, and then we discussed the limits of that area here with the future development, really where we're going to respect the 200-foot setback and keep the roadway, the fire access road where it is now. And,
Let me add a little bit to your comments. I know that Bill
Yeah.
had his hand up here as well, because I want to make this pretty clear. I don't want there to be any confusion on it. The 200-foot boundary from the property line is actually going off of the top of the screen on what you have here, and all
Right.
of that 200 feet is above that
There we go.
access road.
Uh,
Below the
I-
access road, you're showing an empty field of some number of feet, which is what Mr. Mills was asking about. However, there is the intent to put future development in that space.
No, that-
And so even if we talk about how many feet that is for the Phase 2 empty lot, it's not a permanent empty lot.
Right. So just to clarify, this portion of can you see my cursor when I'm
I
up there?
can.
Okay. That's actually inside the 200 foot.
Okay.
It lines up pretty much with the 200 foot. The piece outside the 200 foot is when you start coming down to the roadway. So, so the distance, we'll have to get that distance calced out later, but the property line to that road, you know, probably is in that 150 to 160 foot
Okay.
range now. But the intent is, where we're showing it on the master development plan, is to keep that development outside the 200 feet, which really is defined by the fire access road.
Now, to get to Mr. Mills' specific question, the empty space where Phase 2 might eventually be, how many feet is that field across to before you get to the Phase 1
Oh,
buildings?
that was that question. Okay. Got it.
Back parking. It's basically from the back line of the parking lot.
I'll just have Mark come up real quick because he has a scale and I don't.
Sure, absolutely.
Good evening, Mark Verostic, project engineer with VHB. So the distance from the parking area, from there up to the existing fire access road is approximately 180 feet.
Okay. Thank you for offering up the estimated distance so that the folks have the answer to the question. And I just want to be very, very clear that that's Phase 2 and that's not reserved empty space that is some part of a buffer.
Right.
Okay. Other comments or questions that you heard from the public that you'd like to respond to, and
Yeah.
then we'll kind of help you.
Yep, so
along
the
with
traffic piece, you know, there was a traffic study associated with the original CUP. And what we've demonstrated, tried to demonstrate in our application, we have a traffic memo pulled together that shows our conformance with that, and actually some of the, what's that? Yeah.
They said some of the peak hour traffic numbers are actually decreased based on the current mix for Phase 1
yeah,
versus what
compared
was
to-
previously in Phase 1.
Yeah. So,
Understood.
and understanding that this road, this driveway for MPO, you know, was designed to anticipate large amount of traffic. So, we did take a look at that.
Understood. There were some questions about the tax impact and the
Yep.
fiscal impact, and I know that that was part of the presentation and materials that we had, but for the benefit of folks who didn't have the time to dive into all of that stuff, let me give you the chance to put some of that on the public record.
I've kind of
folks.
got some of that summarized already if Dave doesn't, because I've been looking
Yeah,
for that
you-
information as I was going forth.
I'll let Tim take care of it.
As I
Yeah.
mentioned to Nelson, the Phase 1 positive fiscal impact based on the report is $173,000 and change per year. That's based on a $950,000 a year in revenue and about $795,000 a year in governmental and school district costs. In terms of school-age children, based on the mix of units in the 224, there's 4 studio apartments, 110 one-bedroom, and 110 two-bedroom apartments, which, using our multipliers, roughly calculates to 24 school-age children to be part of this particular
Expected.
project. I know the other part was parking, and I mentioned that in my initial overview. This is based on the shared parking analysis that was approved as part of the conditional use permit. That shared parking study calls for 611 spaces in this phase. They are providing 704, so they're providing well in excess of even what the shared parking requirements would be for this project, for this phase of the project.
Thank you, Tim. One other observation that was potentially responsive to one of the questions is that this Phase 1 has a restaurant and a hotel in it, both of which are commercial
both
uses.
non-residential.
Right.
Other,
Which Mr. Monahan, that's, committed to doing those as part of this first phase.
and I encourage that. I think I'd look forward to having that developed, and say go forward. Were there other comments or questions that folks heard from the public that they want to have the applicant address? Bill, please.
Beth Burns made a comment about the events center because I have one position and obviously the neighbors feel differently. So I probably should have asked the question, how are we defining event center previously? Because the way I define event center, the way we've talked about it conceptually is recognizing the fact that we have Fidelity, we have Marquette, Nanticomp. To me, it's about a place for weddings, conference center, convention location for the companies that we have in town to be able to recreate and congregate at a particular location. But the way that Ms. Burns presented it is like we were going to have, Xfinity Center hanging around or a facsimile thereof on that particular part. So
Yeah.
can somebody define what
think-
what event center
Tom
really
can correct me
was?
if I'm wrong, but I think what it was an area associated with the hotel and there was larger events
Okay.
that would typically be in a hotel, restaurant, or conference area so that they could upsize.
So I want
Tom,
to thank you, Mr. Monahan, for your willingness to answer it, and I want to hear your answer, but I also want to just recognize for everybody's benefit that having an extended discussion about what isn't in the plan probably isn't the best use of our evening.
I would ask the chair to grant me some latitude because I was
I will.
not sitting on the plan before when it was previously decided.
I will, I understand. My thought about event centers and how it might impact the neighbors was simply related to the potential for traffic and noise
And I agree
at
with that.
hours. But Mr. Monahan, let me let you have the floor.
the reason for the event center at the outset was really something that the abutting, or close to abutting business establishments requested to have. But at the end of the day, on the plan, it was a tent. That's what it was. And if you look at the plan that you approved a tent. And so what we've done is taken the tent out, and we're not going to put it
Okay.
back.
Then that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like a concert venue.
No, I just thought it would be weddings and things like that obviously come along
Well,
with
that's-
music, and it's a good
okay.
celebration, and it
Okay.
should be, but.
Okay.
It was going to be part of the hotel, but, we're actually going to build and own the hotel, and we decided not to have it, frankly, because it would require a huge kitchen and the like, and we opted not to do that.
Fair enough, Mr. Monahan. I appreciate your candor. Thank you.
Thank you for answering addressing questions. Do you have other questions that?
I still
Yes,
have
please.
questions. Can we talk about the walking path, if possible?
Yep.
I noticed, I guess the question I would ask is, have you engaged conversations with the DOT about desiring to build a crosswalk to access the Dunkin' Donuts and the new Thai restaurant that's being proposed?
We have not talked to DOT about it.
Okay,
You guys
is
haven't
it,
in
is
your
it, is it
past.
on your radar?
Well, it's on the radar
It's
after
on my
seeing the
radar.
staff report.
It's on
So-
my radar, and it's not to do it.
Here, here.
You know, if they want to do it, they can do it.
And define, I'm sorry, define they, you're
They
talking the
being
state?
Dunkin' Donuts and the restaurant.
Fair
But-
enough.
But our intention is not to do it, and you know, we feel strongly about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the Dunkin' Donuts is a use that would benefit the residents. However, the typical Dunkin' Donut user is someone that's getting in their car, going to work, or
I understand that, but when you're looking at proposing 224 units and then another 120 rooms at the hotel, there might be the opportunity that they're not going to frequent the restaurant, or that, and yet, since you've alluded to that the hotel's not going to have kitchen space, so obviously it's just going to be a place to spend the night and pick up and go the next day. So it begs the question, you know, shortest distance between, you know, 2 points is a straight line, and they're going to go wandering across Continental Boulevard against the light.
Shortest distance between straight line is Starbucks, which is in the development.
And that's true, too.
Development.
I agree with you. And obviously there are sidewalks to access that.
I don't want to
Okay.
disparage my friends at Starbucks, but I'd go over to.
Me too. Me too. But I'll look both ways when I cross.
I guess I'll use my car.
The other question is regarding on one of the, and again, like I said, it's dated the 16th, the memo.
Yep.
Regarding, oh, well, I'm sorry, wrong. Yeah, I'm sorry, the 16th. On page, I guess it's going to be page 4 regarding stormwater handling and treatment. Is that going to be consistent with MS4 guidelines? Are you going to be addressing the MS4 permit that the town of Merrimack has been forced to deal
yeah,
with?
I mean, it's consistent with what was originally approved for the site. So it's AOT standards, which are pretty consistent with the MS4.
Okay. Okay.
Is that fair, Tim?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Boyd. Other comments or questions by members of the board?
I just had one other comment or question. It came up in the discussions, but it didn't quite come up. This open field that's here, when this site is built as proposed, what is proposed for that space in the interim period when maybe we haven't quite lined up the tenants yet for the new buildings? Can we require that to be loamed and seeded and made into a nice-looking field? It begs the question, but right now there's piles of leftover stuff there that I think should be addressed.
Please do, yes.
After the AC/DC concert there, we'll be all set. But
Well, you
no.
gotta have grass for that.
But really, yes, our intention is in the near future to be coming in with some semblance of a development there. We don't plan on it being undeveloped for a long period of time. But certainly, not only in the interest of your request, but in our own interest, we certainly have to have that looking, you know, top shelf. And if it's loaming and seeding or sodding and seeding and putting, you know, something there that makes sense to everybody, including the abutters, you know, we'll do it. But we don't have any plans other than the fact that making it look presentable, loaming, seeding, and maybe some temporary plantings.
Yeah, maybe a note on a plan that would
Yeah, we
say
can call it
that.
out for loam and seed.
Just so it doesn't become a storage
Yeah.
space for
'Cause
future buildings.
Yeah, any concerns the abutters would have would then now become the concerns of the residents that are living there,
Yes,
right? So
it
it's
would
to
benefit your
everyone's
residents
benefit.
too. Right.
As kind of a follow-up on Nelson's question, even if it ultimately becomes loamed and seeded until it becomes part of phase 2, during the construction process, is that going to be the laydown area for materials and trucks and bulldozers and all of that? Because I'm sure the neighbors would be interested to know any noise that would be coming from that. And I don't necessarily think that requires a note on the plan kind of a thing, but it may help the neighbors' understanding of this to have some representations, that there'll be
Right.
a little courtesy and respect in that direction.
I think that's definitely one that we can look at before we come back, because I know Tom would have to talk to the Lacessis and see who's building what when, and figure out where things would go. But
Does that make sense?
Well
I-
taken, yes, absolutely.
I think throughout the process, you've been pretty good at being respectful of the neighbors and making sure that you got some interest and focus on what their interests are. So, I have confidence you'll continue to do that. Other comments or questions by members of the board? So the approach is that we have to continue to a date in the future to complete some of the peer review and some other tasks.
Correct.
What's an appropriate date to consider, Tim?
Right now, I think, according to Robert's memo, we're looking at September 3rd.
September 3rd work for you guys?
It
So
does.
moved, Mr.
Noting that September 3rd is going to be in the very neighborhood of Memorial Day weekend and
You
all.
mean
Labor
Labor
Day, it's
Day.
the day after
Labor Day, yeah, Labor Day, I'm sorry, not Memorial Day.
You're 6 months ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, or behind. Is that going to interfere with anybody's plans to be the Tuesday after a holiday weekend? Understood. With that in mind, but there is a motion.
Mr. Chairman, move that the board continue the application to September 3rd, 2019,
With no further notice to
with no
abutters.
further notice to the abutters.
I second that, Mr. Chairman.
Motion and second to continue to September 3rd. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? It's unanimous to continue.
If I could make a comment just to help clarify the no further notice, I would recommend that the board say, rather than no further notice, that this is your only notice, is this announcement here at the meeting, rather than saying no further notice. I think it's a little bit more consistent with the statutory language to say it that way.
Okay.
I'm happy to acknowledge your comment, sir, but as English is written, further means anything more after
Or,
tonight.
or phrasing it, no further written notice.
All right, I'll remember that.
Thank you for that suggestion, Tim. I think it's a wise one. Before we take up item 7 on our agenda, I'd like to have a brief recess. Just to take a break. We've been going for an hour and a half here.
Mr. Chairman.
So for 5 minutes, we'll take a break and then rejoin. Sorry, okay.
a small town in Mass. The other one's the quickest hire I actually got was Rhonda, and I got her, I think it was 3.5 weeks was from the time I made conditional to.
Yeah.
I was thrilled about that. I know Rhonda personally, and that,
She's been a very good fit.
good. I'm happy to hear that. And I forgot Sharon's name. I was so embarrassed. I'm like going, and you are?
She's been working for me a couple of years.
Couple of years, and I still can't remember the darn name.
Names are kind of my
don't know that
kryptonite.
funny
So.
last that long.
All right, let's reconvene the meeting. Thank you all for the short recess. Item 7 on our agenda is 526 DW LLC as the applicant and owner. Review of an amendment to a conditionally approved site plan for a single-story storage facility and auto detailing shop, adding 2,156 square feet of building area. It was 21,069, now 23,225. And eliminating the auto detailing shop. The parcel is located at 526 Daniel Webster Highway in the C2 General Commercial Aquifer Conservation Elderly Housing Overlay Districts and Wellhead Protection Area. Tax map 5D2 Lot 1, case Planning Board 2019-26. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, this has been before the board many times in various different iterations in the past. Most recently was approved by the planning board back in, it was May of 2018. Granted extensions in October of 18 and May of 19. There is a minor modification adding that additional 2,100 square feet of area. If it wasn't a substantive change, this would be something we would probably consider as part of the normal review of conditions of approval. However, because it does increase the overall square footage of the site, it does require it to come back here to the planning board. As I understand it, Mr. Mitchell and his firm have addressed the majority of the conditions of approval from that approval from last year. What you see in the memo from me tonight is what remains, just verification primarily on the peer review comments and a couple of other things, but otherwise, it's a relatively minor amendment. You do have, as we received today, a letter from Crow's Nest Properties LLC that they wish to have you consider as you get to that point, and I'll turn it over to you at this stage.
Thank you, Tim, for the summary and the reminder about the letter that we received here. Mr. Mitchell, good to see you again.
Good to see you. My name is Eric Mitchell. I'm here to present this plan on behalf of Charlie Morgan and 526 DW LLC. Tim had given the synopsis. Basically, and it's in your notice, there was a detailing shop that was supposed to be on the west wing of the building, and that is no longer going to be there. The building itself is going to entirely be used for the storage of boats, vehicles, and RVs. The main reason why the building has changed in size slightly is because of the length of some of the RVs. We had the west wing was 40 feet deep, but it's more advantageous to have 45 feet because the bigger units can be backed in there and stored more easily. And on the southern portion of the building, that was a 35-foot area originally, and now it's 45 feet for the same reasons to allow for the larger vehicles. Based on demand, it is better to have the larger spaces available. Doesn't absolutely mean that the large vehicle will go in there, but at least they can. They're not going to be limited in space. Secondly, because the detail shop is not going to be there, there's no requirement for a bathroom in the building. It'll still have a water surface and sprinkler system, but the bathroom doesn't have to be there, so we do not have to pump the sewage from that end of the west wing all the way to the southerly end of the property and dig up the pavement and just to put in a line for one bathroom, and that's what would have been required. So basically, the building is just being made a little bit bigger to add, to be able to have a longer RVs to go in there. And that's what it is. And I apologize for not having my easel. I left it in Auburn.
I understand completely.
And I didn't figure that out till just now.
I understand completely. Okay, so completeness is not an issue for us to discuss tonight because this is an amendment to a previously approved plan. There are no waivers. Is there questions about the proposal from the members of the board for discussion with the representative? Nelson?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions. Some of them maybe apply to the original plan. A couple things. First one is I had asked in the previous meeting about the appearance of the proposed new building from the site, what the elevation looked like, the side elevations. And I don't think we've ever gotten any information on that, or at least it's not in my package tonight. And I was a little concerned about that because it's right smack on our main street front porch, front door, and I don't know what this is going to look like. I have a fear that it may just be a building with metal siding and a metal roof, and maybe you can say something about that, Mr. Mitchell, or maybe you can provide for us some elevations that would show what it's going to look like from the street. The other thing, incidentally, it was testified at that meeting that there would be landscaping in front of the building. At least that's in the minutes, but I don't see any evidence of it in this plan now. Maybe it's an oversight. Maybe that's something that should be provided, in my view. The sidewalk, there's a lot of discussion about sidewalk, and I understand there's some issues with Public Works on the construction of this sidewalk. I'm partial to sidewalks, and we're looking for a paved sidewalk, the length of it, and I don't see any cross sections or any detail of the sidewalk. And maybe it's in there and I couldn't find it, but I couldn't find it. Maybe you can help me. The other thing is, where is the parking? How much parking does this site require? And where is it? I guess I'm talking about automobile parking for whoever, visitors or customers or...
The way that this is considered is because it's considered to be self-storage by definition. I'll have to pull it out, but it's a very low parking requirement. But one of my comments is to address the number of quote-unquote units that are available on the site, because that's the one thing that I don't think has been clear, and we're still looking for some clarity on that. So give me
Okay,
just
it
a
wasn't
second.
clear to me either. Thank you, Tim. Those are my comments, Mr. Chairman. I hope
Sure.
I didn't go too fast.
Eric, you want to address some of those, or?
I can. I do not have elevation views with me. There were elevation views when the plan was originally approved. The type of the building itself is exactly the same. It's just that some of the bays are a little bit longer. But the pitch of the roof and everything else is all the same. It is a one-story building. As far as landscaping, it's the same as what was for the approved plan. There are existing trees between the building and the and Route 3, and those will stay. And that's consistent with what was on the original plans for landscaping between the building and the road. As far as the sidewalk, there was discussion at the last meeting originally where we have a sidewalk easement on the existing pavement. We had requested that be the actual sidewalk to go along Daniel Webster Highway, and the approval of the board was to put the sidewalk within the right-of-way and create a new one, which we have designed. There is a sidewalk detail on sheet number, should be on sheet number 8, which just shows the width of the sidewalk itself, which is a 5-foot paved sidewalk. In addition, and I'm not sure if it was on the original plan, but it's in these plans, that if you look on the sheet number 2 that we have of the plan set, there is an area where the pavement is going to be taken up, an infiltration basin for the water to go down into the ground. So we're actually have water that's going to, instead of continue from the parking lot in front of the building going down towards the sidewalk, it's actually going to be going down into the ground for an infiltration trench. So those are improvements that are being done on the front of the building. They do show on sheet number 2, and I believe those may not have been shown on the original plans that were approved, because we were not proposing to put the sidewalk in the right-of-way. But those are there, and I believe those have been reviewed by Public Works, but obviously we do have to have a clean bill of health from Public Works and the review consultant on all of that information.
Thank you for those responses. I've got a couple of questions or follow-ups on those.
If I can follow up on Nelson's comment about the parking. For self-storage, it's 1 space per 10 storage units plus 1 for employee. So
Yeah.
that's the calculation. I know there's an indication of the plan, I think, of 38 units. I think my comment was just a description of how that number was established, so that we can establish a proper parking
And
requirement.
then we can show them on here. I don't know how many that comes out to.
It's not going to be many, but yeah,
But
that's one of the things that will be.
However many there are, they should show.
That's why it's
So
proposed.
on the westerly side of the lot, there's a handful of spaces over by the office.
Correct.
And if all you need is 5, 6, 7 spaces,
It's not
there
going to
they
be
are.
very many.
But I am curious about how they determined that there are 38 rental units in order to do the parking calculation. Can you shed any light on that?
I can't, no clear light. It may have been on the, for this proposed one building, not
That's what
for
I
the
was
entire
thinking.
site. But there's also a possibility that the note that was on the plan was a carryover from other plans. So I understand the request for clarification as to what the requirement is and how it was met. So we will provide that.
Thank you for that.
I have no doubt there's sufficient space on the site to do that.
Yeah, there would, just draw them on there. I am also, as Nelson is, interested in the elevations for the building. I also pick up on the side of the building that faces the bus lot to the north is a 250-foot uninterrupted stretch of building. And as I understand our regulations, we require that you break that up.
Not in this
with
zone.
some jogs.
No,
This is not a district that requires that
no.
under the current regulations.
It's a use that does. My comment on that would be, I don't care so much about the side that faces the bus lot, but I would trade off breaking up the side that faces DW Highway, even though it's the shorter 175, and seeing some architectural features that make it an interesting, or at least somewhat attractive, best you can, side of a warehouse that faces DW
I don't
Highway.
remember seeing the elevations.
We haven't
I
seen
don't
it.
recall them either.
We've
I don't
never
recall
seen
them.
any for this.
Well,
I don't
the-
think. I've never seen them.
okay, it's not just me.
No.
So I like
wanna
to see
see
some
it,
elevations
yeah.
so that we know what they look like and understand how it would appear from the road. And also, those elevations would probably give us some sense of how much those existing trees kind of amount to
Yeah.
landscaping
Yes.
and whether it really kind of achieves the goal that everybody's after. Following up on the sidewalk question with Public Works, thank you for the redesign that kind of puts it out there. I like having the infiltration area between the main part of the side of the parking lot and the sidewalk. I think those are all improvements. I see notes occasionally, and I know in some of the previous ones there was recycled asphalt pavement. And I don't think that that's suitable for a sidewalk in terms of being handicap accessible and some of the goals that we're after. And so I just want to make sure and clear that the sidewalk that we're proposing here is paved asphalt, not recycled asphalt.
The one along the front of the building that needs to be constructed is paved asphalt. The one that goes underneath the trees, behind the trees, currently where this new building's being built, I believe that is asphalt. but if that, I mean, I'm sorry, recycled asphalt, but if that has to be paved, so it's continuous paved all the way over, that can be done as part of the condition of this plan.
I would want it to be
We would
paved so
want
that
to
it,
see
so
that.
that it can
Yes.
be
Well,
maintained.
the trouble, if you put recycled asphalt, eventually grass and everything else is going to come through the asphalt. And that's why we don't usually use recycled, because a paved pedestrian way is much more easy to maintain.
If I could suggest that if you look at item C, under comment number 8, the planning staff technical comments, there's the comment about recycled asphalt. If the board wants to see none of that, just, you can modify that comment to just simply state that that be replaced by standard asphalt.
Which comment are we looking
The
at?
very last one above the, page 3.
Top of C, item C, Mr. Chairman.
So yes, I agree with that. That kind of was the next area that I was going, was not simply the sidewalk, but the access area that the fire department would use around the back of the building is shown on the plan as being recycled asphalt pavement. And I think that there may have been some discussion with the fire department or with the department earlier about whether the fire department would agree to that or whether they would not. And I can tell you from our previous experience that they won't. And so plan on having that paved as well.
Okay.
That part that goes behind the building. And with those two comments, I don't think that there's any place left on the site where there would be recycled asphalt pavement, is there? Any use of that?
No, those were the only areas that I noticed.
Does that make sense? No recycled? One of the things that I do want to comment on that I'm usually attuned to at the beginning of my questions is I think that the front of the existing building, the way that it's been landscaped, the way that those trees have grown in after the last few years, a little bit of the split rail fence and things like that, I think it looks very nice compared to the way that it used to be. And it was neglect of me not to comment on what the applicant has done well over the years. I can still think back to the red and white striped xylos with a blue tarp over the roof where it was half caved in, and us wondering. And I also remember when Tim first joined us in town, we thought about, we talked about 4 sites that needed some redevelopment and recovery, and this was one of them. It also happens, in the compliment to Tim, that now all 4 of them have been rehabbed and redone and rebuilt, and so kudos to him. But fixing it from the red and white striped circus tent to what it is today with the, I like the subdued colors that kind of fit into the natural landscape. I like the way that the trees appear. I like seeing the farmer's market there on Wednesday afternoons. I think that the applicant deserves the credit for doing some nice things on the site.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about that, Mr. Chairman. I concur with your statements.
Thank you with that. I don't have other questions at this time, based on things discussed. I'm sure I'll think of some if there's more discussion, but let me open it up.
We have this memo received today from Dennis White of Crow's Nest Commercial.
I was going to suggest that when you open the public hearing, that be read into the record or summarized.
Okay, I would agree with that, but also I think the applicant should address this. It sounds like we need to do a little drainage.
It may not have. So being that there's probably nobody else in the public to testify, let's call this the public hearing. Share this with Mr. Mitchell, let him have a moment to take a look at it. Obviously, I'll go through the motions of saying if there's any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in, please do. And with that, once he's had a chance to review the letter, I'll summarize it and we'll get some response to it.
What did we do for drainage analysis on this site? Tim, refresh me.
There was a drainage report provided and reviewed by peer review, which will need to be reevaluated based on the additional
Yeah,
impervious and
okay.
whatnot. So there's the condition about verifying peer review comments are addressed, that still would cover that.
Okay, that's still in the unknown category. Okay, thank you.
So to summarize the letter, this is from Crow's Nest Commercial Properties LLC, which abuts this property directly to the north. At their address is 534 Daniel Webster Highway. They are the property that has the new bus terminal. And they indicate that there's been some drainage and erosion issues. It appears that they and the owner of our property here before us have been working together towards a resolution. It seems that there's some amicable discussion, and hopefully that will all work out well. But they do express some concerns about the potential for there to be some additional new erosion with the application that we should consider. Mr. Mitchell, are you familiar with whatever's going on the site right now, and can you speak to?
I am not with that, but in reading this, I may have a recollection that there was a concern at one point, and there may still be. We did do a drainage analysis on this originally when it was done. And what I can say with what we're doing now, we actually have a slightly less impervious cover for this proposal than what there was previously approved, only because there's no entrance going into the detail shop, which, and I can show you on the plan here.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
It's just that one little area right there, which is no longer going to be paved. It's of no significance, but where the building is being made more roof on the building is where there was pavement to begin with. So there's no more impervious, and there's just a slight decrease, which is really pretty much the same. But if there's a concern with the drainage with the neighbor, you know, if that's something we need to address, we will talk to the client to see what we can do to address that.
I believe we have as-built just recently submitted for that neighboring site that might be helpful to take a look at as well.
I have a different recollection of that site. I thought that corner and along that border was,
We're talking about based on the originally approved, where with the increase of the size of the building over what you've already granted the approval for last May. That's what we're talking about, not the existing condition today. It's the condition that was approved previously. There's
Yeah.
less impervious in this amendment than there was in the original
Okay,
approval.
but we still don't have an answer on that either, so, okay, we've got some homework to do.
No, it'll help, and I'm glad that there's
Yeah.
some willingness to take a look at it. If even without this new building added to the site, if the drainage system isn't working as intended, let's take a chance to, fix that and deal with it.
And I will say that where this new building would go, it's all grassed area now, so it isn't
Yeah.
that particular area that's causing the concern. It has to be with the big building in the back, along that edge of their common line. So it's not in this one area, but obviously they want to make sure it's not going to get worse. And if there's a way to rectify current problems, they want to get that done at the same time.
Exactly, that makes
Good.
sense to me. Other comments or questions? Tim, what's our appropriate path forward? We don't have to do completeness. We're waiting on some peer review that needs to get done. Should we?
We're not waiting on peer, we're just waiting, the ultimate, we have, peer review comments were sent to Mr. Mitchell's office. They've submitted the revised plans back to us stating they've been addressed, but I don't have the details of how those have been addressed. So it's a matter of verifying that all those have been addressed based on the most recent submission.
Okay. So what should we do as a board tonight?
I'm
Go over those things?
I'm
or
comfortable with
continue?
conditional approval.
Mr. Chairman, accordingly, therefore, I'd like to make a motion that we agree to the amendment as put before us, subject to the usual conditions as recommended in the memo submitted by Mr. Tim Thompson dated August 1st, 2019.
With the following changes, that item C under
Yes.
8B, or 8C is to state that the replacement of the recycled asphalt with standard asphalt, and additionally that the applicant provide elevation view drawings for the.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Timpson.
Thank you for that. Is there a second for Alistair's motion for conditional final approval?
No.
Subject to the conditions?
No.
Second by Paul. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not comfortable with approving this without seeing some of these things that we're talking about, especially the elevations, the view from the street, the condition of the water runoff, both in the back and in the front or wherever, and the detail of the sidewalk being satisfactory to to Public Works. I think that Public Works still has some issues in there. So I'm not in favor of this motion, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote against it.
Is there other discussion? Let me offer my own comment, and depending on what everyone thinks of it, maybe there's a path forward for this. I agree with Nelson in part that there's no point in seeing an elevation once we've already voted on it. It's, what are we going to do with it then if we decide
That's
we don't
right,
like it
exactly.
or we do like it? And understanding the landscape plans. I am more comfortable that the sidewalk issues are attended to. I think that the same with the peer review and potential drainage issues are the kinds of things that we usually do with conditional approval. If there's some concurrence with that by members of the board that we ought to take a look at these things before we do, the situation that we're in right now is that there's a motion for conditional final approval seconded. If we vote it down, we've turned down this project and there isn't any future development.
You'll have a failed motion, you'll need to take a different motion for anything to actually take place.
Motion.
I think a motion to grant conditional final approval that fails is a failed approval. But there is another path forward, which is to table the motion that's on the table until we have a chance to see this additional information.
I would disagree that a failure to approve this motion is not a denial, because a denial requires you to have reasons for denial. And that would not be in the existing motion, so you would need to take another motion to take any final dispositive action.
I'm not sure that I agree, but I think if the board does take a second vote and motion after this, it makes clear that what the intent was, and the intent controls over the process.
I
either
can
way.
think of multiple occasions where this has taken place just in the last 6 months.
There are some occasions where a failed motion leaves you with, well, what do we do next? Doesn't matter the semantics. Either way will lead us to the right solution if we do it the correct way.
Could I offer a third rail here?
Yeah, of course.
That, conditional final approval with the condition that the applicant appear for a compliance hearing with the elevation drawings before final signature.
If we are at a compliance hearing looking at elevations, do we still have the opportunity to say, make some changes to what we see before
Yes.
us? Or are we at a situation where somebody shows us a plan and says, I've complied with what you've required of me?
It's all in how you phrase the condition of approval. I would have no issue phrasing the condition of approval such that the elevation drawings be provided for planning board review at a compliance hearing, subject to planning board final approval prior to plan signature by chair and vice chair.
Well, let's first find out whether everybody sort of agrees with the idea that we want to see these things. Nelson and I seem to be on one side of the table with this. What's the intent from the other folks? Do you feel like you need to see this information or no?
No.
What?
Really? Seriously, really?
No.
You want to see elevations of a flat lot?
Well, that's
For
exactly
all
the
intents
reason.
and for all intents and reasons, it's a flat lot at the location. This has been before the board on several different occasions. Have you ever asked for this information before?
Yes.
Yes.
And we haven't received it. Yes.
And I don't see the purpose of it.
It's a 175-foot stretch of warehouse about 25 feet off of Daniel Webster Highway.
And
It
the
has a
set-
chance. It has a chance to be attractive. It has a chance to not be attractive. That's a fairly important piece of building, and that's the reason for
I
asking for it.
agree. That's
I
right.
disagree.
Fair enough. I mean, we all have a vote, and you may be in the majority here. What do other folks think? Is it you just want to vote on the motion that's on the table and see what happens to it?
I think we have to take action on the motion that's on
Unless
the
it's
table.
withdrawn, yes.
What?
Unless the maker of the motion and the seconder withdraw,
Oh.
the motion's on the table.
Yes. The motion for conditional final approval
Correct.
made by Alistair, second by Paul, is still before us for potential action. If there's no further discussion on that, all in favor of it, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 2 opposed. 4-2, you're approved. Conditional final approval. Thank you for the presentation. And
Okay, thank you,
Look
and
forward.
we will be obviously addressing all the conditions, but we'll make sure we get elevation view, and I will talk to the owner about doing some architectural, some stuff on the facade, so it isn't just a straight metal building facade, one long thing. And I don't know whether that's, I'm not an architect, I don't know if it's bay windows or it's, or what there is to have different things that jut out and come on that make it look a little bit different than just a typical metal building that you see.
Thank you for that consideration, and frankly, some of the things done to the big side of the main building with the trees and the split rail fences, even though those aren't architectural features, they do make that building look appealing from the outside, and that can be, it can be as simple as that.
Mr. Chairman, might I just also read from the minutes of May the 15th, 2018 on page 3. Mr. Mitchell offered to install trees to break up the look so that and to paint the building in a contrasting colour so it would not have an industrial look. I think Mr. Mitchell, having already promised that, I think we can trust him to do what to be good as his word.
Okay.
I've known him to be good as his word elsewhere as well.
All right, thank you.
I'll
Thank you
believe
for
it
that.
when I see it.
All right, 9 o'clock at night. Let's dive into some regulations. Tim?
Do we want to take care of the governmental land use request first?
Sure. Absolutely.
The one thing I will note is there is a request for an extension for the Rivet Function Hall site plan. Go ahead and toss that because the plans are there to sign and they've already been signed. So we don't take any action on that. The other item is a request from Underwood Engineers. This is a proposal from Merrimack Village District for the Turkey Hill Booster Pumping Station. This is a governmental use of property falls under RSA 674-54. The planning board has the option of holding a public hearing where you could comment on the project and issue non-binding recommendations based on the existing regulations, or you can choose to just allow them to move forward with the project without a public hearing. That's the decision and discussion, that direction we need from the board tonight.
Thank you, Tim, for the introduction to that, and obviously this is the discussion under item 8 of our agenda, discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern. As far as I can tell, I don't have a whole lot of interest in having a public hearing about a pumping station, unless somebody else feels strongly about that. Nelson?
Yeah, I think we should do it for the purpose of it is a function of the planning board to review this. There are issues here where you're in a neighborhood, building a new building with ancillary attachments to it, generators and so on, fuel storage. You've got a bunch of issues that could be issues and probably aren't, but at least we go through them, and I think it's part of our job as planners to look at these things going into neighborhoods and seeing what they are like, and giving the neighbors an opportunity if they have issues with it to comment. So my recommendation would be that we do have a hearing on it.
Mr. Chairman, could I comment on what Mr. Disco has said?
Of course you can.
There is a pumping station there now,
It's underground.
and the new one is about, I think it's 20 feet further off the road. If you have to struggle to see the one that's there now, given the trees and all the rest of it.
And it's
I really
underground.
don't see why we're going to be worrying about a new one going in there a little bit further away from the road, but that's my
It's
opinion.
bigger and more obvious. It's above ground.
I know it's a slightly bigger, but
My only comment is that even if the butters and everybody had 50 million changes you wanted to see to this, they're under no obligation to do any of it.
True.
It's non-binding.
True, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There are opportunities when we've dealt with public hearings on things that are non-binding because they're governmental uses, and from the courthouse that sits, 100 feet from here to some other ones. And sometimes they are very interesting for folks to have the opportunity to see them on TV. I don't think that this makes that list.
Correct.
In my view. And I know that, feel free to disagree. That's why we vote. With that in mind.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the planning board waive its right to a hearing under RSA 674-54 as it relates to the MVD project on Turkey Hill Road.
I would second that, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? All in favor of waiving the public hearing on this project, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
One opposed. Any abstaining? 5-1-0 to not hold a public hearing on the Underwood project. We don't have to deal with the Rivet extension. Are there other items of concern that the planning board would like to discuss here tonight?
May I make a
Seeing none.
suggestion we continue those after we've had this presentation, Mr. Chairman? Only because
Unless we can just check them off the list right now and say that there aren't any.
We're gonna do the minutes, we can.
Yeah, no, we're not done with 8. We're finishing 8, then we're gonna go back to number 2.
Depending,
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask you to reserve the right for me to comment once we've dealt with items 3 and 4. Because I agree with Alistair, I may have something that I would want to say, once we've talked about the, get through the public hearings for both the site plan and the amendment of the subdivision regulations.
Need say no more.
Thank you.
If you wish to have that, then we will reserve that. With that in mind, we'll suspend discussion on any further discussion on item 8 and go to item number 3, which is a public hearing on the creation of site plan regulations. The planning board will conduct a public hearing to consider adoption of separate and updated site plan regulations currently contained as several sections within the subdivision regulations pursuant to RSA 675-6 and 675-7. I know that Tim is ready to go with his presentation. Then one comment that I want to add is that there were some comments that Nelson has put forward after doing some careful study of the regulation, which he's submitted and were distributed to us in writing today. And at the appropriate time, we'll take those up and incorporate those into the discussion.
And the last time we talked about this, I asked Nelson if he could put this together, which he graciously did, so I want to thank him for doing so.
Yeah.
I concur. With that, Tim, ready, set, go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Purposes of giving you an overview of what we're talking about, I put together a brief PowerPoint presentation. Again, what we're looking to do here is to create a new standalone set of site plan regulations, separating them from the subdivision regulations where they've resided in various sections of the subdivision regulations for reasons that I've never completely understood. But at this stage, I think it makes sense to have separate subdivision and site plan regulations, and that's the ultimate purpose here. Secondarily, the purpose is also to update and modernize the regulations, as they have not really been tweaked much over the course of time, and we'd like to add some additional processes and procedures, try to make the process both clear for the planning board purposes, but as well the applicants, so they have expectations going into the process to know what they're getting themselves into, clarifying specifically what we want to see on plans and what those regulations are to make those plans compliant with the desires of the community. So we have these sections, general provisions, application procedures and approval process, design standards, which is the bulk of the major section of the regulations, specifications for plan and documents, which basically gives the applicants an outline of specifically what we want to see on plans, standards for particular unique uses, and then lastly, sections that are new for assurances for completion and maintenance of improvements, and then a section on administration and enforcement of the regulations. Section 1, general provisions, is basically to update the authority per state statutes, provide an expanded and more detailed purpose section of the regulations, and then updating the definitions that are pertaining to site plans, which are much more expansive than what they were in the subdivision regulations, which again, primarily we're dealing with the subdivision of land and not site plans. Second section is the application procedures and approval. This updates and revises the application procedure to reflect how it actually occurs in reality, clarifies the roles of municipal departments in peer review, and we've added sections for conceptual review, pre-application design review, and administrative approval for smaller projects. And again, we've updated this approval process to reflect the current board practice. Design standards, this is again where the bulk of the requirements for plans come from. We've updated the reference documents that set those standards and specifications. We have new sections regarding monumentation, site grading, utilities, water, and sewer. We've revamped and updated the stormwater management drainage standards and requirements. We have a new section regarding streets and driveways. We have totally overhauled the landscape design standards. The parking requirements remain largely unchanged with a couple of exceptions. We've modified and tweaked the calculation for multifamily residential and medical office to address the emergence of urgent cares and walk-in cares. We've also added, in the event to look to the future where electric vehicles continue to become more commonplace, to have some standards and requirements for sites that choose to accommodate those types of vehicles. The architectural building design standards are largely unchanged. We've tweaked and updated the lighting standards, and then we've added a new section for traffic impact analysis. Under the current regulations, there really is no regulatory justification for traffic studies. This actually sets forth requirements and standards for traffic studies as we move forward. Section 4 is for specs and for plans and documents. This is a brand-new section that outlines what information we want to see on all plans and in an application. So it talks about the plan layout, required notes, what we require for existing condition and improvement plans, what kind of documents are required for an application, and then the information regarding the required easements if they're necessary. Fifth section is for standards for particular unique uses. These are uses that have some special requirements. There are commercial wireless communication facilities, religious land uses, contractor storage yards, and then the outlet village shops, which is existing language in the subdivision regulations that we've relocated into this new section. Section 6 is for a combination of existing and new language to go over construction procedures, on and off-site improvements, inspections and inspection services by peer review. That's a new section we talked about last time we discussed the regulations, where we're going to have a third-party consultant look at inspecting to make sure items are being constructed and installed properly for the larger projects. We also talk about occupancy permits and as-built plans in this section. And then lastly, a new section for administration and enforcement regarding how future regulation amendments take place. Saving provisions so that if a court were to determine any particular section of the regulations invalid, it doesn't invalidate the entirety of the regulations. Some legal information about interpretation, conflict, and separability. Section about waivers and the board's requirements for dealing with waivers. Additional board actions regarding defining what active and substantial development is for project vesting. Basically, it sets a threshold for the amount of work necessary to be done on a site to protect it from future zoning and site plan or subdivision regulation changes. A section on what happens if you fail to act on an approval, and then finally on appeals, enforcement, and penalties. Appendices, we've added the site plan fee schedule to this. Right now, it's a separate document for my office. This way, we get it into the regulations so that there's a board oversight feature, so that if we do decide to go through and look at changing our fees, would have the planning board be involved in that. A couple of things regarding landscaping, recommended planting materials and those that are prohibited, invasive species and whatnot. And then lastly, some appendices regarding lighting for different illumination recommendations, and then for gas station canopies. A couple of additional discussion points. I did get a request from a member of the town council to look at adding language regarding construction hours. We can discuss that in a little bit more detail in a little bit. I am currently waiting for some final comments from Don, our town engineer. We also have Nelson's list of comments that we'll talk about tonight, and then any other items to be raised by the board / public, if there are any. So my recommendation tonight is to open the public hearing, solicit feedback from the public, discuss potential changes with us, and then my recommendation right now is to continue the hearing to September 3rd, which will allow for Dawn to finish her comments and for me to address any changes and suggestions the board makes here tonight before we have a final adoption vote. And at that point, I can answer questions, or we can determine how you want to go through the various sections of the regulations. But as you know, I did one really detailed presentation back in May on sections 1 through 3, and then there was a slightly less intense presentation on the sections 4 through 7 that following month. So I think we've gone through in pretty good detail the majority of these sections. I do understand that Nelson wasn't here the night we did the really long one on section 3, and most of his comments, from what I can gather, are things that I think we can easily address as we move forward.
Thank you for that, Tim. I do want to go through Nelson's comments. I also want to make sure everybody else gets a chance to comment as much as they want to, and that we do attend to it in some detail, as much as it's painful to spend a lot of time doing this. We only open up this book once every decade or so, and getting it right is worth doing. So with that in mind, certainly check the box and say that we'll open up the public hearing for comments, allow anybody that wishes to speak. Seeing that there's nobody here to do that, if anybody does arrive, we'll offer that opportunity again. And with that, close the public hearing and offer it up for the board to talk about any specific discussion items and see where that goes, and then we'll tackle Nelson's list and kind of go through it as well. Does anyone separate from Nelson's list have comments or questions about what's proposed and why we're doing this, and does it make sense? If not, then let's start down the list. Nelson, you want to lead us through your comments?
Oh, okay.
I brought a copy if you need a copy.
No, everybody should have a copy. They were sent out today. And if anybody, I have one extra if somebody needs one. But it's kind of late to get it at the last minute if you haven't had a chance to look at it. But
I did look at your list, but you have to sit with the document and actually look
do.
at the section that you're calling for.
You do. We got to go through it page by page to the document. But fortunately, I did list the page numbers and the section numbers that we're talking about in each case. So my first set of comments had to do with the first 3 chapters, I think, which was the May 7th revisions. And I just went into it in detail, trying to pick up things that I thought were missing, or things that I thought were in error, or things that I thought we ought to discuss a little bit before we do them, because they represent changes. And initially, I thought there weren't going to be any changes in here, but Tim made some changes, and some of them are really good. So there's
I do know that when I did the initial April overview, I think, if I recall, my presentation was titled Comprehensive Overhaul. So I thought I was being clear that it was going to be some significant changes. But
okay,
I apologize if that wasn't clear.
I didn't get it, but that's okay. I'm all right with most of it.
You made it clear that it was
page 3. Yeah, if you want to go through these line by line and.
Well, let's just, I mean, we don't have to belabor each of them. Not my microphone's not on, breaking the rules myself. Don't need to belabor each of them, but it does take, let's just kind of go down the list and check through them really quickly. So on page 3,
1033,
there's an item that lists the various goals and purpose of site plan review, and you suggested adding light, trespass, and odor.
Yeah, which I think are addressed in the regulations, but it got left out of this paragraph.
I don't have any objection to adding those things there if they're already regulated in the.
I thought that was really, if it was an omission, it was a good catch.
Yeah. Okay, then we can go.
Seems to be the consensus of the board. The next item is on page 9.
Page
9. Where there seems to be a broken reference to 4.19, which doesn't exist, and whether 4.18 is intended to be the substitute. Close to the bottom, where there's a paragraph number 6, include applicable
2046.
documents.
Give me 2 seconds, I'll decide exactly what that should be. There is a section of 4.09, it's just not that, it's actually.
4.19 is the one that's there.
4.19.
4.18, okay. And then Nelson's next comment is that previously in this section, there was, one of the required submission items was the narrative.
Yeah,
which
the
isn't in our
narrative.
list anymore.
And it's not in here, or I didn't find it anymore.
Is that intentional, or was there some reason, or is it just an oversight?
It wasn't intentional. I just, in my base document, which was Londonderry's regulations I did about 14, 15 years ago, they didn't require a narrative, and it just slipped through the cracks.
Understood.
I think it's handy to have, and I think we should. Yeah, no problem? Okay.
Okay. So that's the next comment.
Then
Page 10.
Page 10 says, the next regular meeting. Oh, I was just going to delete that. I thought that was just putting an extra.
That's statutory language. I can't remove that. The next regular meeting for which notice can be given, that's literally right from the statute.
Well, then I guess there's probably nothing we can do about that. Okay? I didn't know that. Page 11. Page 11 and 205B, 205B2. Proposal may include changes to use, color, image, building size, location, landscaping, and other similar improvements. Okay, this is allowing community development to review minor proposals for administrative approval, which include changes to the building size and the building location. And I didn't care to give that.
The next bullet says that it should not be any more than 10% increase.
Yeah, you have to take it with that.
Yeah.
So I don't mind the point that Nelson's after with giving the department some limited review of size and location. The one thing that I was sort of going is maybe in the other direction and saying, why are we reviewing color even at an administrative approval level?
Again, it's a direct copy from what you said. I have no problem removing color.
I think people can paint their building however they like.
No,
No.
absolutely no.
There's no
That
basis
would kind
in
of
the
defeat the
statute
whole
to allow us
discussion
to
we had
review
on
the
Vault
color of
about
people's
20
buildings.
minutes ago.
Well, I take what you're saying, but I think I like it in there.
I-
If only so I can criticise.
I find puce to be an acceptable color. Puce.
Perfectly fine with me.
Puce.
You know, we've got some buildings that are some bright and vivid colors around town, and there's some suggestions by folks on Facebook that someone ought to do something about it. And I think the right answer is to say it's private property. and
Absolutely.
Color is not authorized in our regulations.
Well, my
for site plans,
suggestion
so.
to Nelson's comment here would be that I have no problem removing the location part of the building, but I would leave the building size with the limit of 10%.
Well,
Well-
that'd be good. That'd be a good improvement.
So-
I don't want the colour taken out.
Well, let's deal with the size first, and then we'll deal with the color. So on the size thing, thank you for that adjustment. They're willing to kind of keep location in there, and although
Well, take
even-
location out. We say that you can expand the building by up to 10%, but you can't change the location of a building from one part of the site to the other.
So here's my thoughts on that.
Yep.
Small changes in location of a foot or two here or there elsewhere probably does belong in here if there's a way to word that correctly. On the changes in size, I'm okay with the idea of changing a 10% size on smallish or average size buildings. But when you get to some things that we've got 87,000 square foot buildings and someone's going to add
Not
9,000
to
more square
exceed
feet.
5,000 square feet.
There you go. Or what?
Okay.
Maybe 5 isn't the right number, but some certain fixed square footage size. Is everybody comfortable with 5,000 being the number, or should it be?
That's a pretty significant.
That's
pretty
quite
big.
significant.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big significant
Up to
change.
6, up to 5,
Up to 5, up to 3, 2,
3,
2,500.
Yeah.
2,500 is adding a modest size home
Yeah.
to.
I'm just
Yeah.
trying to
On your
think of
existing
the
building.
administrative approval we did for the medical facility over by the bowling alley. I want to say that was close to 5,000 square feet. And we
That
did
was
that one administrative.
huge.
That was
That was
administrative, yeah.
Yeah.
5,000 seems a bit large.
So
Yeah.
I liked having the discussion of the medical facility at the bowling alley. I'm not sure there's concurrence among board members whether that ought to have been
I know.
administrative approved or not. And I landed on the side of saying if you're not dealing,
It
a
was
little
im-
bit different than structures, but impervious
It was
surface.
impervious to impervious.
Yeah,
That was
if
the
you're
thing.
putting a building over parking lot, you didn't do anything.
If you put it in the grass, you.
Yeah, anything that would impact drainage would be something that we would bring to the board.
Okay, so as we're talking about these edits, is there a way to incorporate minor changes in location, 10% in size, not to exceed, what's our number on square footage?
2,000.
2,000 square feet addition? Does that work for you? Is that 2,500?
I think that's a bit cheap. I think
I
you
would
go to
be-
3.
I would be comfortable at 3,000.
Yeah, 3.
Personally.
Definitely.
If you, I mean,
If you're doing both 10% and 3,000,
10% not to exceed the
Yeah.
total of.
So it's 3,000 if you're adding it to a 30,000 square foot building or bigger, and on that site, it is a minor.
The concern is you're throwing square footage out here like it's arbitrary. Is there any planning standard that you?
It's really it's a comfort level with staff if we feel like it's something that needs to go to the board. We always defer to bringing something to the board over doing administratively. So these are really guidelines that we're trying to put into words how we currently do this. So I have no problem. It would be rare for us to have approved anything larger than 3,000 square feet.
But $5,000, I mean, that's on the medical center. That's significant. And to be candid with you, only because I was not a part, what actually got, not to get sidetracked, I'm just for perspective, what got done?
I believe it was enclosing area of mechanicals. And it was already on concrete pads, and they wanted to enclose it within a structure. So because there was no change to impervious or drainage, that's why it was considered it to be eligible for administrative approval. That happened, what,
And of course.
a couple of years ago?
And of course, if that would have had to come to the planning board, if there was no administrative remedy.
Correct.
I mean, what would the planning boarding,
It would have been a very minor, probably waiver of full site plan review.
you've done 5,000. I don't think the more that I think about it, if you've worked as far up as 5,000, I don't think that's unreasonable.
And I think having that 10% limit means that the only way we'd ever be able to do a 5,000 square foot addition is if it's a 50,000 square foot or greater building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like Nanacomp, Marquette,
Yeah.
Fidelity Investments. Yeah, they've worked with 5,000. I say put in 5,000 because obviously they have something that they can rely on anecdotally to use as a reference as to whether it meets the administrative criteria that they use. I like 5,000, but I'm one man's opinion.
We're moving in a direction of creating administrative approval where there hasn't been any regulations to support it at all before. The administrative approvals that we've done before have been sort of a nod towards, let's do some things that make sense. I'm thankful that we're going there, but I'm also a little cautious about our first few.
I can tell you
steps
that
in that direction.
99% of administrative approvals are changes of use that have no site changes.
Yeah.
That's 99% of what we do for administrative approvals.
And I think that's why, for the most part, we don't even know that they're happening, because nobody looks out and says, what's going on over on that lot? Because,
It's just a tenant change is all you see. Yeah.
That said,
I'm going to leave it at 3 for now, and we're going to have another public hearing where we can discuss it
Okay.
further.
Now let's deal with
Okay.
the idea of location changes that are minor. Is there some language that we can pick on that we agree that is a location change that's de minimis or not worthy of planning board's review? And we've seen some things where it's literally 2 feet.
Bobby, you just totally brought me back to paralegal level with your usage of de minimis. Very impressed. You've totally geeked me out tonight. I love it. Love it.
There you go. We had the folks that did the bus lot come back before us because they were 2 feet, literally 2 feet over from where, and we reviewed it and we scolded them properly for, building it
That's
2 feet
kind
out
of
of the wrong
this-
place.
That was kind of the intent of that language.
Yeah. And I think that we ought to have administrative approval for those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Now, what defines a minor, modest change in a location that is appropriate for administrative
What I'm
approval
going to
versus not?
suggest is that I add somewhere in this list of criteria that the planning board, or the staff shall verify with the planning board chairman or his designee in the event of any doubt or concern about the applicability of administrative review.
I think that makes sense. Perhaps location could be defined as a minor change in location that has no impact in any other engineering features.
Sure.
Or something like
That's pretty good. I would agree. You're right. As long as there's no change, like you said, if there's no change in the engineering, then that would make sense.
Yeah.
Obviously, any changes in the engineering, they gotta,
Item 4, the expanded building footprint shall not increase the amount of stormwater runoff accommodated by the most recent site plan approval unless deemed appropriate by town engineer. Already
okay?
in there.
I should have kept on reading.
So, Even with that one, so we had not that long ago on Continental Boulevard, a little addition of a vestibule of 300 square feet or something like that. And technically, it's a tiny little bit of new impervious surface. We even agreed when we heard it not to send it to peer review because it was, again, de
I can tell
minimis.
you the reason why we did not consider that administrative, because they modified access to the roadway. Had that not been the case, we would have done that one administratively.
So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I think that even in saying changes in impervious surface, there probably is some leeway to say, I don't even want to necessarily haul somebody back before us because they've got a.
That's why I've got the language that as long as the town engineer is comfortable with it, we
Okay.
can consider it.
Excellent. Nelson, your next comment is on.
We haven't, Mr. Chairman, I just checked.
Color. I'm sorry.
We haven't taken colour out, and only reason I say it, and I'm vividly remembering when the Burger King updated their facility on Continental Boulevard and/or Amherst Road, and they tried to put in their standard, the national standard of colour dock building, and God bless Mr. Koenig, assisted by me, we both stuck it up and said, no, we want it to conform. We don't want, just because they're doing it in somewhere Washington and they're painting it pink, we shouldn't have to have it pink. So I would like to retain the.
I agree with you 100%, except for that's not what this regulation deals with. This deals with an administrative approval of somebody changing the color of their building.
Well, I open the door that somebody.
The fact that we still have the words exterior appearance in there, I'm fine losing the color.
So the thing is that if you leave color in there, it's not getting at, and I picked on the color of the enterprise rental over by the Volkswagen. I didn't want that to be a green building. Same kind of a thing. When we're doing full site plan review, we can look at all these kinds of things. Does someone need an administrative approval to paint their building beige instead of white? Because the way that's written, yes, you do. Come into, I'm going from, off-white to, light brown.
Yeah. Eggshell.
Gray to, come get them in. No.
But Mr. Chairman, just taking your example, the enterprise building agreed to a colour and we approved the whole site. We're saying they cannot come back, or at least I'm saying they should not be allowed to come back and say we're going to paint the bloody building green.
If it's been a condition of their site plan approval that they've agreed to a particular design or a standard or a color that we've imposed on them.
What I'm hearing from you, Alistair, is you want those to come back to you, and you don't want me to have control over it. Because that's what this is saying. This is saying that I'm going to have control over color, not you guys. So if you want control over color, you want to eliminate the word color.
I don't think that, so if someone's come up with a proposal and color was part of the decision that the planning board made, like the Burger King was, and some other sites that maybe we thought, if we had to do over again, we'd do them a little differently, or I don't want to pick on individual companies. If color was a part of the approval and we restricted it and we limited it in the site plan, we put a note on the plan that said this is what you're going to do.
We wouldn't even consider it
Then
in this
color's
administrative.
established. But as a general matter, I don't think that color should be or could be within the statutory framework that we have, something that we're making decisions about. Do we have a historical district with some kind of architectural standards? Maybe in those places, you could look at it and say it needs to be white New England clapboard. But we generally don't have any of that.
That's not general,
And we're not
we
talking
don't.
about historical districts, we're talking about regulating
All over
paint.
town.
You've got places down places in Massachusetts and up in Maine that have to go before a historical commission just to change the color on their old, 1600 salt box house or 1700 colonial
Right here in
that dates
New
back
Hampshire.
to Paul Revere times.
In a historic district or in a historic building, yes.
Exactly.
I don't-
So you don't have that here, which is why I agree with Director Thompson. Exterior appearance gives this board a lot of latitude to not only quibble about color, they can quibble about clapboard, they can quibble about shutters, they can quibble about awnings, they can quibble about anything that they feel, and I say they colloquially in the sense of the board, not us, but the board feels is necessary to bring a project into an aesthetically appealing building as it relates to what they envision for a particular location.
And I like that result when we're dealing with site plan review of a development building. However, if you build these into the regulation and say that color and exterior appearance is a part of it, then everybody that changes those features on their building at any time in the future, you know, if Rite Aid says, you know, we want to paint our brick building white, it's site plan review.
I mean, there was.
Do we want that? Do we
I mean,
really
there was a
want
business down the south end of town. I hate to throw businesses' names out there, but it was nothing but good times. Where they had an issue with the sign, they put something up there, and it was, and they just said, can you just change the sign? And that's all they did. They changed, you know, the staff should be able to have the latitude to do something like that. And when I think exterior appearances, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, it would include signage as well. So, to me, exterior appearances is an all-encompassing phrase that, in my eyes, includes color, and therefore would have.
The intent of the language,
Right.
at least from 16 years ago, was, and again, this was in a community that did have design standards for architecturals and whatnot, was architectural changes, facade changes, things
Correct.
like that. That was the intent of the language for exterior.
And that makes sense to me when you're doing some structural, architectural facade changes. But painting your building, and literally, you can't match paint
I've already
colors,
crossed
and so-
color off. I've already moved on. Because I can't believe we've already spent that much time.
I agree with you, Tim.
We're on
I-
page 11 right now, okay?
Well,
I'll shut up.
The thing about it is when you.
And we're going to
get-
have another opportunity.
You don't want to be forcing people into coming before this board because they changed their color of their building.
And again, just to remind you, this is for things that do not come in front of the board, but you're saying, hey, Tim, you guys deal with this.
I don't even want you dealing with the color of their building.
I don't even.
What does it say what does it say to the community if we're tasking Tim and his team to regulate color of buildings in this community?
I'll be called
You wanna hear
communist
people
even more than I
outraged?
already am.
You're right.
You want to hear about outrage about the intrusion into public, private property?
Go right ahead.
You know?
Absolutely.
That's
Go right
what
ahead.
you're about.
Page
And
12.
We're afraid to deal with temporary signs for the same reason.
Well,
All right, 12, where are we at?
I would suggest, I'm okay with 12 with the with one proposed change, that the planning board be notified of all administrative approvals that involve exterior or site changes. For the ones that are just simple changes of use, do I really need to report those to you guys every month? Because you'd get a pretty long list of,
Yep.
it's
So-
all tenant changes, really.
Is there some kind of log or tracking or case number or something that you guys are putting on what you've approved?
They just get filed with the, whatever most recent site plan was in the site plan file.
I don't want to make this overly burdensome, but even when it's a change of use and you say such and such was approved as a restaurant, now they're putting in a Sprint phone services, we approved that. I don't mind knowing that. I mean, I don't necessarily.
I'd like to know that, you know.
I don't
people-
necessarily mean an oral report as you go down the list, but even if it's a piece of writing that is part of our package and we acknowledge that it
I'll add this
exists.
to the duties of the assistant planner once we get one on board.
Okay. Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you for putting that
have an
in,
interest
because
in knowing those things.
I'm continually confronted by people in the supermarket saying, hey, what's going on here? And I say, duh. You know,
Yes.
Because you don't know.
Yes.
I will
Well, I
say
just-
this, that for a lot of things, if there is not a actual change of use, if it's the same use category, there is no administrative approval from us either, because that's not something we have jurisdiction over.
And that's
So if you've
usually
got a
the way I
salon
answer
to a
those grocery store
salon,
questions.
Yeah,
I wouldn't know.
yeah.
That's the way I answer them. I don't know because that's not within the planning board's jurisdiction to decide
But
whether
sometimes
the
they're
karate
big.
studio became a dance studio.
Sometimes they're big, like the addition on the medical center, you know. I didn't know. Okay.
Don't disagree with you that one. Okay, you have page 13?
Page 13.
The fire code and building code,
Yeah.
frankly, they don't, there's nothing in there. The building code technically is already referenced in the zoning ordinance, so it's covered by the reference to the zoning ordinance. Fire codes, I'm reluctant to put in there because that's structural stuff for the most part, and we already have language in here that allows plenty of fire department input in various places. Which is, but again, I'm not totally adamantly opposed one way or the other. I just think that it's not, it doesn't need to be a specific reference document for site plan regs.
The town manager, prior to me joining the town council, made the decision to remove the building department under Tim's auspices
To
and
the
to
fire
put it under
department.
Chief Courier's jurisdiction for a specific reason. So I would expect that building and fire codes really need to be consistent under the regs of the fire department as opposed to the community development department. Now, if we still had building department under Tim's jurisdiction, and then I'd be inclined to agree with Nelson, but since,
Well, the thing I was thinking of when I added that was the applicant who comes in to read the regulations, and this is kind of an instruction to him as to the stuff we're gonna be looking at, right?
No, this is, I think, just this is the basis saying for anybody who's trying to challenge our regulations,
Yeah.
these are the standards we're basing these things off of. And I don't know that building codes or fire codes necessarily jive with the purpose of site plan regulations like the other items that are in here, that are site-related issues and not structural-related issues.
So here's my thought on this, and I think it will support some of what Nelson, or some of what Tim is suggesting, and maybe even go a step further. Building codes and fire codes, and a couple of other things I'll point out on this list, that are separate legally enforceable requirements by other agencies, don't require us to go and hammer that nail again. The fire department enforces those codes, and there's no impact, there's no legal effect of us saying, me too. And the items on the list that also fall into that are the 10, 11, and 12. Those things that are enforced by the DES, us saying, me too, you've got to follow DES regulations, does absolutely zero in terms of changing the development of this structure. Now, does it hurt anything to leave them in there? Nope. But
I
it
think
also
it's
doesn't
benefit.
add anything, it doesn't add anything at all.
I think it adds, but, yeah.
It's like saying, we're gonna require that people don't speed down DW Highway. Nice that we said so, but
Well-
it ain't our game, it ain't our play. It was somebody else's, they're gonna do it, we're never gonna do it. So what did you add by putting that in the regulation? That said, because it really doesn't do anything, if it's the will of the board to keep those things in there, it doesn't hurt anything either, so.
I think it benefits the people who are trying to figure this out. And
Those
Yeah.
legal requirements already exist. They're enforced by others the same way that the DES, does somebody need an AOT permit? If they need one, they need one. It doesn't matter what we say about whether they need one or not. Same thing to me.
It's true, but we want them to go get it and not find out when they come to the planning board meeting that they haven't gotten it. You know?
99 times out of, 999 times out of 1,000, they're not gonna be looking at the building code until they get through the planning board, the fire code and building code until they've gotten through the planning board and gotten their approvals.
You know, and what we require on a plan where we show an outline of a building doesn't have anything to do with the building code anyway.
Correct.
You know?
Because all that stuff is separate through the building permitting process and the fire inspection process.
I think
I
that,
get,
we may have people showing us how many handicap spaces they've got, and maybe that harkens back not to the building code, but.
that's covered by other items in here. That's, we have
Anyway.
specific requirements for that separate. Anyway.
I'm willing to say at 10 PM, it's not worth any further discussion. If people want it in, put it in. If you don't want it in, put it in, but let's decide and move on. What are your thoughts, board?
I've made my peace. I have no, either way, it's not gonna bother me. I see it's unnecessary.
I generally have an aversion to Me Too regulations, simply because the thing that you've Me Too'd can sometimes change.
Correct.
And you didn't intend it to, and just better to keep your oar out of the water when it's not your area. So, that's my thought. But, in, out. Everybody that wants them in? Everybody that wants it out? It looks like there's more outs than ins, so.
I'm neutral.
Okay.
Easy, John Burkow.
We're up to the one that starts with page 14.
14, I have no problem adding to make that lot corners, all the lot corners on the roadway, that's fine.
Yeah, why did you change that?
It's just the language I had from my reference
Oh,
document.
okay.
Yep.
All right.
Wait a minute, we require 2 monuments at each corner or 2 monuments at the front?
The way that I have written is that at least one lot corner has to be a stone or concrete bound, and the other ones could be an iron pipe or steel rebar. This is what I'm saying now is that all property corners, all lot corners on the right-of-way shall be stone or concrete monuments.
Which is what it says now.
It's in the current subdivision, and I agree, for subdivision, it's again, it's a site plan versus subdivision thing. I have no problem with that, so, done.
Okay. Page 14.
304, do we require underground electric service on all site plans?
We do currently, yes. The language is just different, that's why it's in red. It's just the phrasing of how our current requirements, but we do right now require all utilities underground.
To all commercial sites and
It's,
everything?
right now, we don't have anything for commercial sites because it's in the subdivision regulations. Our subdivision regulations say underground, so, again, with us separating this into its own document, we need to.
Okay, I just wondered, have we been enforcing that? That was kind of my question.
You guys have to grant waivers if they don't do underground, yeah.
So right
Is
now,
that-
when we take up somebody's commercial development, I don't know that we even draw our attention to
They
the fact
usually
that
don't,
they've got.
but it's, technically, it's one of those things that, yeah, my opinion is that unless they've got a good justification, it should be underground.
I don't disagree with that.
I'm okay with that,
I
yeah.
can't stand looking
I
at
just-
overhead power lines, and I think we've got some stretches
I
along
agree.
DW Highway where we've just got
This
overloaded
just
poles.
makes it clearer and
I'll say.
specific to
Very-
site plans.
Yeah.
That said, we've got some developments where, Gilbert Crossing, if you buried all the lines across their 5,000 square foot frontage, you've just spent a lot of zeros. Is that really where we're at? Or do we grant waivers when that comes up, or what's the plan?
Where's
Or-
Gilbert
or-
Crossing?
Flatly.
Flatly.
Oh, Flatley.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Those poles are transmission up and down DW Highway. They're not service into their property. But there's an immense number of power lines
It's
on
crazy
the
how
front
many
of that
power lines
parcel.
are in front of that property, yeah.
yeah.
To the point that it even obstructs some of the nice-looking buildings that they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to build back there. Is it the intent that we're just talking about what services their property as it enters their property, or things that go across their frontage?
Oh, I don't think we can talk to across their frontage. I think we're just talking from the frontage into their building. I don't think we can regulate on the frontage.
Well, I think you can just as much as you regulate a sidewalk across their frontage, but whether we choose to or not.
No,
It would be anything new would be subject to, so. If it's coming off of a pole, we'd require to go underground from the pole, based on
Into
the way
the
these
site.
regulations, into
Yeah,
the site.
but he's talking about going along the
No,
street.
I don't think that we should. I think that that's too much, but
That's
we
not
gotta
the
be clear
intent,
what
this is
we're
for
asking.
anything new.
Yeah.
The existing is, you've got existing poles out front there, that's not something us nor Eversource are gonna let you really do much with.
No, right. Eversource hates underground.
Not necessarily looking
Alright,
to ask their opinion.
I mean, how close are we to build out in this community?
When we did our master plan, we thought it was within 10%.
Yeah, I
build
wouldn't
out.
give a solid number on that because you really never can take into account redevelopment. of property.
Redevelopment, I mean, I agree with you on that.
But in terms of the number of greenfield sites that are left, not a lot. Of any
When we did the
significant
master plan, I
size.
think it's like 1,000 acres out of
Yeah.
a whole lot of acreage in town.
I mean,
Still
I
greenfield.
tend to agree with Nelson that if we're talking new construction that's actually physically on somebody's like Robin Milligan Parkway probably comes, that would be the one that I would use as an example that I would, I'd bury everything, and if you could put up streetlights, that'd be nice, but if you're not gonna put up streetlights, bury it all. That's really the only thing that should be above ground, if it's gonna be new, is streetlights, which,
I agree with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Page 15, state
Okay.
subdivision approval. That is actually an NHDES subdivision approval. It does relate to septic, but they still refer to it as a state NHDES subdivision approval.
They call it subdivision
Yep, they do.
approval? I thought it must have been a typo,
Nope.
no?
Yeah,
And
that's how they attack the septic systems, is through quote subdivision approval.
Correct.
Yeah.
Common disposal systems, yes, those are allowed under state law. Do we have any? I don't think we do, but I think we need to account for them. I can't imagine we're probably gonna see them for a non-residential site, but I'd rather have the language there in case somebody proposes one.
I think our non-residential, our commercial is all on areas that are serviced.
Nothing's gonna prevent somebody from variance or so, there's, I wanna protect, it's just a cover your butt type of.
Yeah. I agree.
And if there's heartache over it and you don't wanna have it in there, I'll take it out, but I'd rather have something than nothing.
I don't mind having it in there because in the event someone's looking at on-site disposal systems, which are disfavored, at least common is better than individual.
Yeah.
If we're gonna do on-site.
It's far more likely to happen in a residential application than it would in a
Yeah.
commercial, industrial.
I don't think there's much along DW Highway that isn't
Yeah.
serviced.
Northern part.
All right,
All right.
15, 16.
Anything referencing drainage in section 3.07, I am going to defer to Dawn for her comment on that.
She's supplying comments. is
She
that-
she has not given me her final comments yet,
Okay.
and I will make her aware of your concern, your comment there. And 3.09, yes, absolutely, it is on page 20, let me get to page 20.
This is a whole new.
Yep, this has always been intended to be a complete jettisoning of the current landscaping standards and redoing them all.
Okay, and why do we want to do that?
Because I think our current standards are too rigid and we get unintended results where you have to have formal things in rows and fences. I think you are stifling creativity in landscape design by requiring the buffers to be in X, Y, Z and no other options, which is the reason why I've tried to do this in a method that requires and
We tried to give
encourages.
a lot of options when we wrote that.
It's a nightmare it's also a ridiculous nightmare to try to administer in cases too.
Oh, I won't disagree with that, but I just want to know what's wrong with them and what are we getting in its place? We get nothing now. There's no requirement here for buffering between different uses, right?
It's giving you guys the option, let's see, where am I? Where we get into specifics are really when we get into the buffering of parking lots, when we get to the parking section in 3.11. But we do have screening in section E. And item 4, screening may be required at the discretion of the planning board along front setback areas or part of it. Screening may be required beyond minimum setback areas or further into lot, particularly if the building is located beyond minimum setbacks and the lot configured is such that visibility in the side or rear setbacks is unimpaired from the public right-of-way residences or principal
I don't know
edges.
where you are.
I'm on page 22.
22.
Section E, item 4.
Yeah, okay. Now, there's something, why do we want to screen, we want to screen from the road is what we're saying here, right?
Potentially.
What?
Potentially.
Eventually.
Potentially.
Potentially. I don't know if that's gonna help anybody do business if we're talking.
Again, it's, the discretion is to you as to whether or not you feel it's required. What I'm saying is when you do require it, this is what we need to do. And I can develop something in terms of something similar to requiring the applicant to do landscape treatments when abutting, similar to what we have today, but I'd want to put it in some way that it's not as cumbersome and complicated.
It always takes time to think through these things and then see it applied a few times to make sure that it works the way that you
Yeah.
intended it to. But the general standard we have now where any two disparate uses that come together, someone's got to put a buffer between them, I don't like. I think that we look at it each time, we try and wrestle with what to do with it. And I also think that we've got this notion of doing mixed-use developments and infill style. And every time we do that, if we said we've got to put in, you know, a berm with an 8-foot fence or else a 12-foot wide this or that, just defeats this idea of trying to create these things that if they're architecturally pleasing, if they're designed correctly and in harmony with what's around them, I don't want to sit here and say, well, that's technically a commercial use and this guy has a residential before it, and so we've got to do an 11-foot wide planting with 32 trees in it. I don't think it works. I think
You
there's.
wouldn't interpret the present regulation wasn't intended to be interpreted that way.
We've
If you
applied
have
it
a
that
si-
way.
What?
We applied it that way.
We have no choice to apply it that way, the way it's written.
Well,
Yeah.
wait a minute, you telling me like Monahan's site here, you're gonna try and screen the?
That's different because you have the authority under the
That's a
conditional
conditional
use
use
permit
Yeah,
to
okay.
modify and do
So give me
that.
an example where you,
I don't remember all the details of the ones that we've talked about, but along DW Highway, when we've done like the interstate batteries, when we've
Yep.
done Merrimack Tax Associates next to Chris Ross's stuff, we've dealt with these notions of, well, that's technically a residential, that's technically a commercial. The thing next to Skip's Boats is a residential on one side, a commercial on the other. And each time we've tackled that, we've sitting there and said, well, okay, it's a class 4
Category C,
subsection
type A.
D, and it's gotta be 4 feet wide, and does that even make sense? And is there enough room on the property for it? Oh, well, no, we can't, so we've gone to a B, it's gotta be a fence. And I think that there are times when you wanna screen, and so you get some regulations that allow you to do that. But sitting here and saying every single time that you encounter commercial next to residential, it's appropriate to tackle these questions, I don't really feel that way.
well, how would you phrase it then to do what you want to achieve here? Because I don't see how this quite does it. It talks about screening, and it doesn't say where it's applied or anything.
Let's take a look and make sure that it works.
How it's
And that's what I
applied.
meant by, it always takes a time or two of applying these things or reading them and trying to get
Yeah.
your mind around the whole thing all at once, but,
Yeah,
All I can say is, I can understand the trepidation, but there are close to 17 years worth of this language in Londonderry, and I can point to most of their site plans having very attractive and well-designed landscapes and screening when it's appropriate, using these exact words.
So if you look
That's
at E2 and E4, you're providing some pretty good discretion to the planning board to say visual impacts of unsightly loading docks, trash storage, unsightly areas associated with generated by particular developments, required at the discretion of the planning board along the entire front setback or only a part of it, extend beyond the minimum setback in certain areas of the lot. Those are the areas where I was looking at it and thinking to myself, okay, that gives us the ability as a planning board to say, in this situation, based on what's going on before us, we think A and B should be screened from each other.
Let me get, there's a little bit more to this, but it's in a separate section. If you go to page 31, it talks about mitigating the impacts of parking lots. And that's where it gets into the different screening requirements depending on where the parking lot is located. It also gets into screening from residences and other items that are a little bit more specified when you're talking about having a parking lot abutting. Talks about perimeter shade trees and a variety of other requirements that are more geared towards the parking lots, but let's be honest, that's where the landscaping is gonna have its most impact, is when you're around the parking lots and interior to the parking lots.
I agree with that. Thank you for pointing that out, and it kind of helps a little bit.
Item number 7, page 31, section I, number 7, screening from residences. It's very clear what the intent is. I just looking at, just screening from residences, looking at,
this is for parking lots, though.
I understand
It's only
that,
for
but I'm just
parking
saying,
lots. Yeah,
it's very clear.
it is for parking lots.
It is. I'm not looking for a rigid requirement that says anytime two uses are next to each other, we've got to screen one of them from the other. And you don't have to look at it.
If we go back and look at the anecdotally looking at the Pizza Roma site, because that's where we had some issues, where the neighbors really wanted some vegetation to address some of the visual issues were there. And the applicant came before this board, and after going back and forth, came up with something that was relatively reasonable that the abutters could live with. So that's, to me, if the applicant was relying on existing rules for that particular language, and Tim is now granting greater flexibility, Tim's suggesting that we grant greater flexibility based on something that we dealt with and we thought was pretty good, I don't know why we're sitting here belaboring the point. I really don't.
And I know it's unfortunate, Nelson, you weren't here the night we did the longer discussion on this section, but we did have a fair amount of discussion that night regarding the change in the philosophy on landscaping.
I think that in addition, I can't argue with any of those things. I think in addition, what weighs on my mind is this notion we built into our master plan of putting mixed-use development, infill style, where it close to build out. The things that aren't built out are not along the commercial frontage. The commercial lots are going to be redeveloped more than developed going forward. Correct. And the way that we've imposed buffer requirements as if we should compartmentalize each particular use and say that, somebody has a right not to have to look at their neighbor. That doesn't exist in my neighborhood. I mean, two residential, I don't want to look at my neighbor's house either. Anyway.
If we take a quick look at properties that may be cited for redevelopment at some particular point between Bedford Road and Fraser Square, we've all driven that road. There are several properties that at some particular point are potential for redevelopment. And whoever comes in there to do redevelopment, I'd want them to come up and have the flexibility to come up with something that's going to beautify those particular areas along Dean Webster Highway, because we're trying to create, that town center,
streetscape
kind of thing. So I think when I think streetscape and I look at this, I hate to use this word. It's performance-based landscaping. I mean, that's the flexibility is there for whoever comes in to redevelop is going to be able to do something, be able to put something together that blends in and makes that town center concept. Some things we've talked about, that I know Nelson's been actively involved for at least the last 10 years. A lot of potential there. So I'd rather have the planning board be able to grant these, whoever chooses to redevelop properties, the flexibility to do something that's unique. To me, I think we've gone beyond the rigidity of what we've done as past practices. And I say that sincerely, Nelson.
Well, we've done that with everything so far anyway. I mean, we have demonstrated flexibility in the application of these other rules. I just would like to see how this all fits together. This thing talks about mitigating the impacts of parking lots. And I think maybe maybe that's okay for parking lots. I gotta read this more carefully and decide if that's really the whole story.
I don't want to cut off that point because I agree with you that we want to make sure we're considering all the things. The one thing that comes to my mind with parking lots, and it relates back to this other idea of mixed use and infill development, is let me ask Tim, does this give us the opportunity to encourage people to put the parking lots in the back?
It's trying to encourage them to do so, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I know that's in here.
It's incentivizing by requiring more landscaping when your parking is out front or on the side, yes.
That helps, and it's not that I want to have more landscaping out front, it means I want to have the parking lots in back. If you want to have a walkable community that's got streetscapes, you don't build a big parking field out in front of everything.
It's true. That's very true.
Boy, are we late coming to that, unfortunately.
Well, and certainly
our
on some of the
hometown.
parcels, yeah, we got a bunch of them with parking lots out in front. So, but as we see Daniel Webster Highway get redeveloped, it may be that people are making new uses of old buildings, and it may be that some old buildings get knocked down and combined together with some lots that are around it as developers that are able to accumulate some resources. Whatever that is, I don't want a requirement that says build, 8 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet and put it right out in front.
I agree.
It's awful.
Yep, I agree.
So, thank you for having that in the regulation that allows us to do that.
It requires us to do that. It's going to require it.
Unless you waive.
What?
Unless you grant waivers. It gives, that's ultimately the flexibility by having this type of requirement in the site plan regulations versus zoning, is you guys have the flexibility to waive your requirements, provided you meet those standards from statute.
So,
Okay.
what,
Well,
have we exhausted the conversation about landscaping and screening and buffers, and are we satisfied with what we've got
There's
in our
always
draft?
September 3rd, Mr. Chairman.
There is, but as we continue
I
down
need
the
to
path.
have direct direction
We don't
tonight
want-
as to whether or not I need to make changes to this stuff.
Yeah, at
moving
some point, we
forward.
need something we can vote on, and if it's September 3rd, making some more changes.
Based on what I'm hearing don't touch for now, based on the general consensus I'm seeing.
I don't have a problem with this. I like this. It's,
I do too. I think I remember when we were doing the mixed use, the CUP that's next to Nanacomp, how there was actually reversed where the commercial development was saying, build a type A D buffer to protect our commercial from your residential. And technically our regulation said, well, yeah, that's what you should do. And you're looking at it and saying the commercial is offended by having to look at residential next to it? Go, what is this? This is backwards. And that kind of also rang through to me as I thought, let's have some flexibility to say, nah.
So if we were to move beyond the landscaping stuff, I think we go to page 25, which is the question about the reduction in the multifamily parking requirement. That is because we've granted so many waivers for every single time somebody's come in that I've researched and tried to find a better number that's more accurate towards what the actual requirements are.
okay, that's what I was wondering, where it came from.
Yeah.
you
It's
know?
from research into numerous communities and trying to find the happy median for
Yeah.
a parking requirement. That was actually a suggestion that came from when I sent this out to other design engineers. They all came back with, your parking requirement for multifamily is so out of whack from everybody else.
For multifamily.
Yes, because we were requiring almost 3 parking spaces per unit based on the way it was written.
Yeah.
And that's just beyond what.
Well, we used to get complaints in here about, I remember one particular planning board member who lived in a multifamily community and was unhappy with the amount of parking provided because, you know.
Must
who
be
he is.
Stan, huh?
What?
Must be Stan. Huh?
It was Stan, right.
God bless his soul.
But that development that he lives in, I live in, and I gotta tell you, there's plenty of parking in there. People park on the street now and then, they're having a party or having a bunch of company, they park all over the grass, and they're gone the next day. So they solve their own problems when there's these peak loads, and they seem to be getting away with it with the lesser parking. I guess that's where I was going.
We've certainly, I agree with Tim that in all of the residential that we've seen lately, and we have seen gotta be 10 different multifamily developments.
Yeah.
We've had people saying, we don't need this much parking, we know what we're doing, we've got developments, we run them ourselves. It's our responsibility. If people don't like the amount of parking we have, they won't move in, and that'll be on us. And we've accepted it.
Absolutely. I will also note that I've also said that also, the other change is requiring 1 guest parking space for every 10 units, and that they're reasonably dispersed amongst the site.
I think that makes sense. And I've been pretty vocal about not wanting to pave the planet. And on some of these parking requirements, especially on a bigger development, you start saying, well, you need, what was it that parcel A needed, 600 and something?
Well, that's
You're gonna
based
do
on their
700
shared
and something.
analysis. The actual regulatory requirement would be well over 1,000.
And that's crazy for that site to do 1,000 parking spaces. I think there's 1,200 parking spaces at the mall itself.
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit more than that, actually.
Could be, anyway.
Anyway,
Not a
yes.
whole hell of a lot more.
Page 27, 311F2, there is a requirement to note all waivers that's already in the regulations in another spot. This was specific to parking, just that they have to not only have the date, but also the number of spaces, just because it's specific to parking spaces.
It is required elsewhere?
There is another, in section 4, it requires all waivers be noted on the plans, yes.
Okay. I thought that was important, and
Yep.
I didn't see it.
The other couple here, I think, 311I, L3 and 6, those are regarding the landscaping stuff that we talked about briefly a couple minutes ago. Do we want to go any further into that?
Well, I'd just like to know how this screening of the front parking lot is going to work. We talk about,
Talking about the 10% piece?
let me just see what it says here. Page 31. Go to page 31. Page 31. Oh, 3.11. How do I get there?
Yeah, that's the part 6, I think, is you're talking about screening front and side of principal buildings from public right of way up to 3.5 feet. And that's based on the shade tree requirement, that we have 1 shade tree for every 20 feet of parking lot perimeter.
Yeah. I don't know how these work out when you come to actually see them. These are lifted from Londonderry, I presume. huh?
Yes,
And,
there, my work from Londonderry.
okay. 31.3. Somehow or other I've got on the wrong page or something, huh? Where did I screw up?
I think that 3 might be to the Roman numeral, the small triple I, where it's talking about, down where the 5 feet back.
No,
from the curb is.
31, page 31.
Part 3, internal parking landscaping shall contain 1 deciduous tree for every parking. Trees shall be set back at least 5 feet minimum from the face of curb. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, that was one of the questions.
That's just prevent root damage to the parking lot itself. Just try to give us more space
Sightlines,
back.
too.
Yeah, but that's gonna get some pushback, right? Because now you're talking, if you have an island, you've got 10 feet.
That's perimeter. Actually, no, that's internal. Yeah, that requires pretty good sized islands. And
Yeah.
they've been building them in Londonderry for the last 15 years.
Well, now that we've got fewer parking required, we probably can do this.
And this is related to parking when it's in the front and the sides. If you put the parking in the rear,
You only have to do
It's changed.
5%, so. Yeah,
and
it's,
so that's a good encouragement. If you don't want to have 10-foot islands, put your parking in the back.
And then you can damage the tree roots.
No, it's not that you can damage the tree roots, is that, you're not looking for the shades and the screening and all of that stuff, so you don't put the tree at all.
Is that right? Is that what it, is that? It's not clear to me if this is only applying to
I don't know.
parking in the front.
oh, this is for all, that section is for internal parking landscaping as required by part L number 1, which is all interior, and then it varies the percentage that you're required based on where the parking lot is located.
Yeah.
So if at the front, 10% has to be parking islands, 8% on the sides, and 5% in the rear. But that internal landscaping requirement from 3 applies to all 3 of those situations, not just front.
Yeah, oh.
So you have less parking islands, but they still have to be big.
Correct.
I'm fine with that.
The electric vehicle accommodations, yes, that's new. That's just intended to be predicting and hoping that at some point these vehicles are going to become more prevalent. and just having some requirements to make sure that we're doing them correctly. This is based off of research that I've done in other communities from other parts of the country and New England in terms of.
I was just wondering where it came from and if we should reference some standards or something for it. It looked like we made it up, and I know we didn't, but we borrowed it from somewhere.
I wish I could have just come up with that off the top of my
I
head,
know-
but
I
I'm
know-
not that smart.
I know, but you took it from somewhere, and
Yeah, it's an accommodation. I Google searched electric vehicle parking requirements and picked and choose what I thought was appropriate for Merrimack.
yeah. Why
I
is
would
this
generally,
appropriate for Merrimack?
because this is a developing field, I would be careful not to make reference to somebody's standards
Yep.
because Tesla is the leading automaker right now, and they'll
Well-
tell you how to do their charging stations. And the next thing you know, here
Well-
comes Ford with theirs, and you're
Yeah,
crosswise.
Somebody's
That's
gonna have a
why I
better
thought-
widget.
Yeah, most of these are just making sure they are properly protected with bollards and things of that nature to prevent damage to the charging stations and whatnot.
These level 1, 2, 3, all of that is some industry standard.
That's defined in page 32 under item 2, Roman numeral 2, A, B, and C.
Yeah, but those are,
That's industry standards.
okay, what industry?
Electric vehicle charging stations.
Huh?
Electric vehicle charging stations have 3 different levels,
Yeah,
and
and does that come from is there some overarching group that decides what these should be like, or something like in lighting standards, or something like that?
I'd have to go back to the source materials because it's been so long since I put this stuff in, but it's the level 1, 2, and 3 showed up in every single set of regulations I looked at.
Yeah,
I think to some extent, when you consider that they're all tied to the amount of voltage that flows through them, you're talking about the difference between safety standards and is someone going to get electrocuted if a car runs over a 240 plus voltage as opposed to a 120.
That's correct.
yeah.
And those kinds of things. And so, since those seem to be something that's started to develop in the industry as being somewhat of a standard, I mean, I certainly, if there was some source and you could say this comes from the IEEE, whatever, you do that, but I don't really mind it if it doesn't.
Okay, I thought it should, if there is such a place that you can.
Something there,
What?
placeholder. It's a placeholder, really.
This is.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I realize nobody's gonna build them tomorrow, but,
I wish they would.
yeah.
Anyway, let's see, 43, 46.
Page 43, huh?
Trying to think.
314 and 314. What the hell? D.
Yeah, I'm trying to find where the crosswalk or the sidewalk where it is.
Yeah.
Pardon me for a second while you guys chew on that one.
Feel free to keep going.
Yeah, I don't even see the word sidewalk anywhere or crosswalk on page 43.
I don't either.
It's on page
I-
44. Section C,
Okay.
paragraph 2.
The word crosswalks is after the word sidewalks there.
Oh, what have I done?
And the other one was D9.
Page 46. That would be paragraph 9, subparagraph Roman numeral 2.
Yeah, I can add some crosswalks there, that's not an issue.
Anyway, I wanted them to consider sidewalks in there, was the general idea.
Yep, sidewalks are in there, I'll add the word crosswalks, that was.
Or crosswalks, I meant, yeah.
Okay. Page 60 and 61, I think we had this discussion last time. This was a piece of thing that resulted from, I don't want to call it a fight, but yeah, it kind of was a fight on religious land uses abutting residential properties, and this was an attempt to create buffers for those particular uses to, I frankly have no heartache one way or the other if that entire section goes, but I thought it was worth having discussion on. And I think, if I recall the discussion we had back in June, it was kind of 50-50 on that one.
I didn't see the need for it, because, first of all, there's only one church in town that meets that, which is the one you took this from, right?
No, this is from Londonderry. This was over a proposal for a church in Londonderry, and I ended up having meetings with, I think it was 7 or 8 different religious facilities and churches in Londonderry, attorneys, because this got into the whole Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, and it was just basically coming to an agreement amongst everybody that they all agreed that if these are the sizes of the buildings, these buffers made sense.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we need that, to be honest, but. Yeah,
I have, like I said,
Chairman.
I have no heartache one way or the other with this section. It was something that was in the regulation base that I started from when I started drafting, and like I said, I'm open either way on it.
There's nothing in our present regulations regarding churches especially. We're up to churches.
61, Bobby.
61, thank you for that
Yeah.
reminder. I do remember that we don't have any zone in town where churches are actually allowed as a matter of right, as they're written now.
I believe they're all
Special
special
exceptions now.
Are they only by special exception?
Yes.
Huh? Huh?
Which frankly can run us into some issues, but
Yes,
that's.
I didn't realize,
Uh-huh.
I thought they were allowed by right. Yeah.
Touches a couple of
Oh, yeah,
constitutional.
it does touch a couple constitutional issues, because basically, RILUPA says that if you allow places of assembly, you have to allow churches.
Yeah. And frankly, I don't know why churches would be offensive or require some special explanation for where they are. I think that they're great additions to neighborhoods.
Like I said, I'm fine with eliminating the section if everybody else is.
I would, if you don't want to see someone put a fence up on your own property, I would just take that section out. Why put the responsibility on the church?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, because this is specific to those unresidentially zoned.
Unless, like
Yeah.
you said, you came into, experience where that would make life easier for us.
I mean,
but-
the only real experience I have locally here in Merrimack since I've been here was Jehovah's, which everybody freaked out about. And now that it's actually built, people are like, really? We made this big a deal
Yeah.
about this?
Then I would be fine taking
And
that section out. I don't know
Jehovah
about
did a
anybody else.
beautiful job.
Of course they did.
Nice
I'm
job
taking it out.
landscaping. They did everything the abutters asked them to do, and then some. You know, so,
It's gone.
Maybe a little bit too broad an observation, but generally churches do kind of design attractive buildings.
Yeah, they
and
do.
Some
Yeah.
fancy architecture
Yeah.
and a few
Yeah.
spires and things. Famous one in Rome caught on fire. They're going to rebuild it. I heard it's nice.
I mean, look at
You
St.
mean one
John,
in Paris?
St. John Newman off of 101 behind all the retail stuff. What they've done there is just,
Beautiful,
it's beautiful.
absolutely.
So,
I also remember the experience with the Jehovah's Witnesses and how concerned people were and how a big nothing burger it is now that it's built.
Yeah.
In terms of problems, it's a positive, I think, for the neighborhood.
I think so.
But there were people swearing up and down that they wouldn't be able to sell their house because it's 200 feet away from the new Jehovah's Witness
Yeah.
center. And
And Jehovah's Witnesses were gonna be coming over to their houses.
It's the other
bringing
way
their
around now.
besides that, man, those were some fantastic people that were talking about coming in and building their places and how they built their freedom halls or whatever they call them.
Yeah,
Anyway,
okay, we'll take it out, that's
Okay, when you get to the contractor storage yard thing, the dangerous vehicle is now gonna be rewritten as construction-related vehicle, and the word simple is gonna get removed.
Okay. Good deal. And then page 61, 503D.
I think requiring an enclosed facility is problematic, but
I think it's environmentally,
and most of these are going to be covered by a roof-type structure, but they're not going to be completely enclosed.
yeah, it doesn't say completely. I just suggested putting a roof. Oh, I see, I did say
Enclosed facility.
facility, yeah.
That's good. I think that's going to really be coming. Conservation Commission's going to want to see these things have some protection, and you're probably going to get more stringent recommendations from Conservation Commission than anywhere else. That's why I kind of worded it the way I did. But
So I don't disagree with any of that and perhaps the logic, but this gives the Conservation Commission its very, very first taste of a mandatory requirement, because nothing else that they do is
Yeah.
mandatory.
True.
Yeah.
That's a good
Yeah.
point.
Is that okay with us?
Yep.
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 Fair enough.
All right. 79. Uh, 701. The reason that only says board is because under definitions, way back in the beginning, it says the word board shall mean planning board.
Board is planning board, okay. I just wanted to make, I just reading it along. and
Oh, sure. No, that
By
makes-
the
that's
time I
fine.
got here, I forgot what's.
All right, so
going
that
on.
gets us through Nelson's comments. All
I think-
told, and outside of, I think your concern about the landscaping requirements, they're all
Yeah, I
relatively
think I'm
minor.
pretty satisfied too, and I think it's been a great job that you've done, pulling all
Thank you.
this
Yeah.
into one document, and I appreciate that, and this is really worth doing.
I agree with that. Thank you for all the work that you've done. I know that you've shown me where this is before, and we've talked about including it in there, but one of the additions that we talked about was being able to regulate or require people to install security cameras and that sort of thing. Is that in here? And can you show me where we
Off
talked
the top
about
of my
that?
head, I don't recall.
It's, I
I'd need
don't
to do a
think
word
it's in
search.
there, I don't remember reading it.
Okay.
I read this cover to cover, but, yeah.
Between now and next time, I know we talked about an addition for those kinds of things for certain uses to require. We have some kinds of lighting, but I don't know that it totally gets at safety and security, but security cameras, and those kinds of requirements. Police parking spaces in the right situation, whatever those kinds of things are.
Yeah, that's mostly,
Yeah, I don't have a problem putting something in for security cameras in the lighting section, but I don't know if I do much with police parking spaces or anything like that.
no, I don't think so. And there's some, not security, privacy issues that people raise regarding these security cameras, right?
Well, yeah,
Maybe.
but if you read this, there's a whole riot going on in Manchester about this. I don't think we want to start getting involved with security, either side of the security camera business.
I think we do and we must. And it's for sites like the extended stay hotels, which take cash business and have no idea who their customers are, and there's no ability to watch what's going on. And we should have, and I wish we would have been able to tell them, you must install security cameras. And I wish that there was a planning board approach to requiring them to identify their customers. But we don't have the ability to do that.
What I can tell you,
It's a slope
anecdotally, Chief Roy came to the council, I don't know if it was extended stay, but they, the police department have been working with those types of facilities, insisting that they get not just a form of ID, but also a credit card payment
Yes.
for.
And I think
The
that's a
cash thing is, yeah.
huge benefit.
Yeah.
But having security cameras that are positioned in effective ways with the appropriate lighting so that the images you get on a camera are the right kind of quality, there are certain kinds of developments that, if you don't do those things, you're inviting exactly the problems that we've got. And I wish we could get back at some of those sites and fix some of those things. We also had a situation that never got developed here, but There was one of our properties was trying to be the storage lot for the new cars from one of the car dealers. I think it was a BMW
That's
dealer.
right, yes.
And we'd have hundreds of BMWs on a lot that's not lit and not security cameraed and not whatever. And if you want to invite the whole world to come and look for mischief, let's put, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 sedans
Yeah.
in an unsecured, no camera site. And those are the kinds of places, and I would never suggest that everybody's got to do it. But for safety.
I question whether the site plan regulations are the right place for that,
Yeah,
or
I
if they
agree.
should be zoning or general code of ordinances.
I
That's,
mean, surely if somebody's going to store that number of BMWs, I would have thought their insurance company would make a whole load of specifications far more
That's true.
arduous than anything
No,
we
you're
could put in writing.
Maybe so. Are we gonna rely on that? Because we would have thought that the extended stay hotels, insurance companies would put some requirements on them.
They're not my BMWs.
No, but it's your neighborhood where the criminals are gonna come.
What about when Prime went in? Did we require
Yes,
for them? So-
absolutely. They were turned inside and out, upside down and backwards by the police department with their requirements for security and vestibules and identifying
Yep.
people.
Much of
But
which-
that was the police department requirement.
those were not site plan
Got it,
requirements,
okay.
No,
correct?
you built those. We had to amend the
They-
site plan regulations just to
Zoning.
allow those
Zoning.
kinds of things.
We had to
Well,
amend
one of the
zoning. That was a
regulations,
council thing. And I can vividly recall, and it still sticks in my mind as one of the most poignant things I've ever heard at a council meeting. Finley looked at me after I went through the whole presentation and said, "So why aren't we doing this for CVS and Walgreens and all the other drugstores in town? Because what's the difference?"
I don't disagree with that.
Yep.
I don't disagree with that, but yes, we did do it. For
Well, I think CVS has cameras.
Actually,
I mean, they all
Walgreens
do.
has cameras.
They
What
have them, but
he
they've-
meant was the
they've
level of
chosen to do it. They're not
scrutiny and
required.
everything that went
Got
into
it.
the
He's right. I
regulation.
agreed with that at the time.
Here nor there. And speaking of Finley, the one thing we haven't addressed is whether or not we want to add language regarding construction hours. There was a complaint related to construction of the road work on East Chamberlain, that it was happening at late hours of the evening. And I had indicated to Finley that I would bring that issue to the planning board for consideration as part of these regulations.
I support it. Absolutely support it.
I support the board having authority to raise the issue with applicants, but I don't have a rigid answer to say you should do construction between daytime hours or, because it could be
I can
equally
give-
possible that you tell people to do nighttime construction on
Perfect
purpose.
example, water line construction. You don't want that happening during the daytime. You want water to be shut off
Exactly.
at nighttime. So I have no problem. If we're gonna go down this road, I would like to have it as just an enabling that says the board may condition approvals based and limit construction hours as they deem appropriate, rather than having something specific.
Now, that would make sense.
That would make sense, yeah. You could do maybe the same thing with the security cameras.
That's how I planned on doing it, yeah.
Yeah, just make it that way that we may require it without,
Any specifics?
Being
Yeah, I don't want to
firm
try
or
to get into
specific,
specifics on
yeah.
that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it
So-
doesn't belong on every
No.
development,
no.
and any of those kinds of things.
Which gets me to my recommendation that you continue the public hearing to September 3rd.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
I'll
Yes.
say-
Motion and a second to continue September
Who do we
3rd.
have for the second? Dan?
Nelson.
Nelson, okay.
Or Alistair, anyone.
Well,
Um,
I'm
Pick a
not-
name. We didn't get a second for that.
The only last one on my mind is when we were dealing with, it wasn't the Pete's Roma site, but it was next to the condos down there, and dealing with truck alarms and backups and delivery times. Have we got whatever we need to be able to regulate that the way we want to?
Yeah, I would consider it the same way we're considering construction hours.
As long, I don't think that it's ever limited us in the past. I think we've always been able to
Yeah.
put those requirements in
You
when
can.
we've needed to.
Yeah.
I don't know that
But-
necessarily needs anything
You
specific, but if you want.
First of all, those are federal things.
It's a federal thing. Any vehicle of certain sizes must have
No,
backup
you're
things.
missing
Meaning the
point.
hours that they
Nobody's
can be
saying that
operating
you
on the
take
site.
the alarms off or that you don't follow the federal regulations.
Talking about the hours of service.
The
I
hours of
understand
service
what
of
you're
the
saying,
deliveries.
but
And we've imposed that requirement a whole bunch of times. I just don't know whether we've got any regulations that allow us to do.
I don't know
we've
if they
done that.
follow them
General health,
once we
safety, and
do it.
welfare.
What's that?
General health, safety, and welfare.
Certainly in the statute, yes, there's that kind of authority.
And in our now newly revised purpose of regulations and whatnot, so.
Anyway.
I'll think about that one.
With that in mind, I have no other further comments on these, and if it's the will of the board, all in favor of continuing to September 3rd, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? 600 for that.
This is the only public notice?
Yes, this is your only public notice. Do we also want to, I don't think that we should pick up a discussion of the subdivision regulation at
disagree.
this point either.
I disagree. I want to get them out of the way and have them adopted conditional upon approval of the site plan regulations.
I don't disagree with the goal. I don't think that I'm not functioning.
This
at a point of
literally is
doing
a
anything.
2-minute discussion.
Bob, it's 2 minutes, trust me. It's
I
2
understand that it's 2 minutes, but it shouldn't potentially be 2 minutes. Just because we're separating it doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity to look and see, is there anything else that we're fixing while we're at it?
That's the
I think
next
that we
step,
should.
is the comprehensive reevaluation and rewrite of the subdivision regulations that I'm going to start undertaking upon approval of the site plan regulations.
I don't disagree with
So-
that goal. We're still.
I can't get into it because you haven't opened the thing, but yeah, this is all intended to be temporary amendments to the subdivision regulations.
Let's read it into the record and see what the will of the board
We have
is.
to anyway.
Everybody
We just have to
votes.
open it.
Public hearing for amendments of subdivision regulations. Planning board will conduct a public hearing to consider amending subdivision regulations to remove all sections pertaining to non-residential site plan review pursuant to RSA 675-6 and 675-7. And Tim, I know that you want a presentation. I still continue the idea that after all the things that we've discussed and all the things that we've gone through, doing a coherent job of anything with this at this point is a mistake. That's my only opinion. I won't belabor it any further.
I will hold off on going through the presentation unless I have consensus on the board you want me to.
So, point of order, Mr. Chairman, this is a public hearing.
It is.
If we move this to a date certain, does that mean we have to renotice the public hearing?
No, we wouldn't. We'd continue just as we did the other one.
But you haven't opened it up yet, Mr. Chairman.
No,
That's my point.
we've just read it into the record. We haven't decided to take any particular actions. The approach that we took with the site plan regulations is that we went through all the substance that we thought we could so that we'd have something close to a final draft next time.
I get that.
Tim is suggesting not that we do that, but that we conditionally approve what he would discuss and present to us tonight, where we wouldn't even be opening up the discussion of it again.
Correct? Because essentially all I'm doing is taking
Taking
everything
out
dealing with
chunks.
site plan regulations that is going to be this new standalone document and taking it out of subdivision.
And it obviously makes sense. The whole point of doing a subdivision is that you cut out the site plan stuff from the subdivision regulation. However, that requires a little bit of attention to review and seeing whether we got everything and seeing if there's anything else on anybody's mind. And doing that at 10:45, in a rushed job, to me sounds like, what are we rushing for? We got time. Take a look at it with an open review, flip through the pages, read the thing, and decide if that's the way we want it. Nonetheless, we've read it into the record, introduced it, and so we're having a public hearing. The question is, what action will we take after we do that? Public hearing's open. Any public want to weigh in? There aren't any in the room. Public hearing's continued until next time, depending on what's the will of the board. What do you want to do with this?
Mr. Chairman, move the public hearing for the amendment of the subdivision regulations to September 3rd.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One opposed? Any abstained?
Two
Two opposed. Any abstaining? 4-2-0 to continue it to September 3rd. Dan and Alistair.
Down and Alistair.
Who was the second?
Paul. Bill moved, you seconded. All straight?
Could I make a suggestion that if you are continuing to September the 2nd,
Third.
that people go through with it with their own fine tooth comb, like Nelson has done so well with the other regs, so that we don't extend this for another 3 hours and therefore another 3 weeks or so.
The only sections that have any modifications other than complete deletions are modifying a couple of definitions so they're consistent between the regulations and fixing a formatting error from a previous revision. Otherwise, it's just deleting all the
That's
sub-plans.
what it is.
That's correct.
Well, that's what's on the table now, but is that all that should be? And that's, I don't know, maybe it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, we had suspended discussion on item number 8 to find out whether there were gonna be any discussion items, and so we'll resume that. Are there any discussion items?
I'm gonna,
Go for it.
you know what, I'm gonna keep my powder dry, Mr. Chairman. I'll wait till we meet again, where the hour is more suitable.
Other comments under discussion items then? If not, the next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of July 16th, 2019.
Mr. Chairman, move approval of the Tuesday, July 16, 2019 Merrimack Planning Board minutes as presented.
Thank you for the motion. Is there a second? Second by Alistair. Any discussion of corrections? If there's none, then all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? One abstention. Dan? 501 to approve the minutes. That
I would be
concludes the
then happy,
business.
Mr. Chairman, to make a motion that we adjourn.
Seconded.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 600. We're adjourned. Thank you all for the work. Don't forget to turn your microphones off. All right, Tim doesn't want us to adjourn.
I just want to get this stupid subdivision regulations done.